Hi guys. Tonight we ease into the kind of winter that makes your breath turn to tiny crystals before it even has a chance to escape. You stand on the ragged edge of the Old West, the world around you already swallowed by a storm that moves like a living creature. The wind shoves against you in long, angry pushes, and the horizon vanishes behind rolling curtains of white. It is the kind of cold that slips through seams, sneaks under clothing, and reminds you very quickly that out here you probably will not survive this unless you get smart, fast, and maybe a little lucky. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like sharing, post your location and the local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights. You trudge forward, boots sinking into powder as the light fades. You can almost hear the way history crackles in the cold. The frontier at night feels torn between silence and fury, a place where every sound either drifts soft as feathers or snaps like breaking ice. You reach a low valley, the type settlers chose when they wanted a little protection from the winds that screamed down from the mountains. Even now you feel how exposed they were. Nothing but the sky above, the plain ahead, and whatever shelter they could throw together before the sky went dark. A few logs and a leaking roof often had to substitute for what you would call a home. The storm is starting to cover the structure in snow, disguising the roofline and blurring the windows until the whole cabin looks like it is shrinking under the weight. You step closer, and your gloved hand meets the raw texture of frost-coated logs. A mainstream historical fact flickers through your thoughts. Many early frontier cabins were built without proper ceiling because settlers were racing the weather, building fast instead of well. Gaps between logs were stuffed with mud or moss, or anything that looked like it might behave itself long enough to hold back the wind, but nothing stays still during a blizzard. You place your ear to a wall, and the groans echo through the wood. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Some settlers swore that the cabin walls talked during winter storms, muttering complaints about snow loads or the ghosts of travelers who never reached safety. Whether they really believed this or whether it was a way to distract themselves from the fear is a mystery you will never quite solve. Historians still argue whether these tales were expressions of frontier superstition or simply boredom wearing a costume. Inside, the warmth is thin and uneven, like someone tried to stretch one small fire across too much space. You shut the door behind you, and flakes melt instantly on your shoulders. The air tastes of wood smoke, old pine, and damp wool. Your fingers begin to thaw and tingle, which is both comforting and painful. A family might have lived here, or perhaps a pair of drifters who built the cabin before moving on. Whoever they were, they understood how fragile comfort was. Out here, the space between warmth and danger was narrow enough to trip over. You scan the room and imagine the nightly routine. Settlers battled the cold with stubborn practicality. Every evening was a race. Stack the wood, patch the roof, check for cracks where cold drafts sneak through like spies. The cabin feels like a ship in a blizzard ocean, and every sound makes you wonder which plank will fail first. You move toward the small window, where the wind rattles the shutters. Snow swirls outside in frantic spirals, each flake another reminder that winter in the Old West was not a background detail, it was the antagonist. You walk to the center of the cabin and crouch near the hearth. The fire sputters with an orange glow. It is not much, but it is better than nothing. Many early settlers learned from indigenous nations that the placement of the fire mattered. A central hearth warmed bodies more evenly than a fire against the wall. But not everyone had the skill or the time to rebuild their floors, so they made do. You pull your coat tight and sit in the warmth zone, the small pocket where heat feels real. Outside of that circle, the cabin is a freezer framed in timber. The wind roars again. It sounds like an entire river of air smashing into the outer wall. You stay where you are and let your eyes adjust. Shapes emerge slowly in the dimness. A few blankets piled in one corner. A wooden chest. Some tools. A rope. A half-empty barrel of water with a layer of ice on top. A few nails and hooks hammered into beams where wet mittens might have hung to dry. You imagine the people who lived here. Did they sleep well? Did they fear the storms? Did they whisper into the darkness, hoping morning would come? You step toward the bedding corner. Straw is scattered around, flattened and twisted. Early settlers used whatever they could gather, often stuffing mattresses with straw or leaves. Over time, the material broke down, creating lumps that poked ribs and backs all night. But it was still better than lying directly on a frozen floor. You brush your hand over the bedding and feel how cold it is. The kind of cold that makes your joints ache just thinking about lying down. A shiver runs down your spine. You picture yourself curling up here while the wind hammers at the door and the fire starts to fade. The pressure of the moment becomes strangely soothing. You find a small wooden chair and sit again near the hearth. The fire snaps quietly. You let your mind drift into the sort of thoughts settlers might have had in storms like this. Were the livestock still alive? Were neighbors safe? Would the roof collapse under snow by dawn? Did anyone remember to store enough water before the barrel froze completely? The Old West was harsh, but nighttime storms were another level entirely. People tried to sleep, but sleep was as unpredictable as the weather. Some nights you drifted off quickly simply because your body gave up. Other nights you paced or whispered prayers or sang low tunes to keep the fear from rising. One of your boots starts thawing near the fire and releases a faint scent of wet leather. It blends with smoke and pine and something else you cannot name. You picture yourself peeling off heavy layers before lying down on the rough mattress. Maybe you would keep your coat on. Maybe you would not. Sometimes warmth won, sometimes mobility did. You lay your hand near the fire, careful not to touch the embers. The heat feels like a promise, fragile but real. You lean back, letting the wind and fire blend into a kind of frontier lullaby. A thought circles your mind. If the storm lasts all night, you will need every lesson the Old West can offer. How to conserve heat, how to keep fear from stealing sleep, how to listen to the cabin without imagining things that are not there, how to trust the walls even as they complain. Your eyes grow heavy. Outside, the storm rages, but somehow, inside this rough cabin, a sense of calm begins to settle. You are learning the rhythm of frontier nights, and the story has only just begun. You stand from the hearth and drift deeper into the single room as the storm presses harder against the cabin. The walls tremble here and there, almost shy about showing how fragile they really are. You run your fingers along the inside logs and feel the cold pulsing through them, creeping inward like a slow invasion. Cabins in the Old West were built fast, and tonight you sense every shortcut. This place is not made to impress anyone. It is made to survive the kind of weather that sneaks in through every crack. You settle near the back wall where the temperature drops noticeably. Cold air seeps through chinks that were once filled with clay, but have long since crumbled. A mainstream historical fact slips into your thoughts. Many frontier cabins were thrown together in just a few days, using simple saddle notches or V-notches, because settlers did not have the tools or time for more precise joinery. It sounds admirable until a blizzard arrives and reminds you that speed does not always pair well with weatherproofing. You lean close to a gap and feel the icy draft kiss your cheek. Someone tried to fix it long ago. A scrap of fabric is jammed into the hole, stiff as a board now. It is the kind of improvisation you see everywhere out here. Buttons made from bones, windows patched with oiled paper, floors filled with dirt when planks were too expensive. A quirky tidbit whispers to your mind. Some settlers rubbed bear grease along the log seams thinking it would block airflow, but it mostly attracted curious mice who appreciated the buffet. Whether this was common wisdom or misguided enthusiasm is the sort of thing historians still argue about when they want to entertain themselves. You pick up a small stick from the floor and gently tap the wall. The sound echoes differently depending on where you touch, hollow in one spot and more solid in another. Snow outside has begun to bank itself against the cabin. You picture it rising like a growing tide, pressing weight against the walls. Snow can act as insulation, but only if the structure beneath it holds. You step back and take in the entire room. This is more than a shelter. It is a battlefield where heat and cold fight for dominance every minute. The fire crackles again, pulling your attention. You walk toward it, passing under a low beam where someone carved initials. Your breath fogs as you move away from the hearth. Settlers understood how heat behaved, even if they could not always manipulate it well. They knew that a low ceiling trapped warmth, and they built cabins small for a reason. Large rooms were impressive but impossible to heat. Tonight you appreciate the tightness of this space. Every edit to the structure is meant to defend sleep. You crouch by the floor and place your palm on the uneven planks. They feel like slabs of ice. In winter, the ground beneath cabins froze solid, making floors the coldest surface in the house. Sometimes settlers scattered straw along the edges or placed rugs made from stitched animal hides. You imagine a family layering whatever they had to keep a little warmth inside. A single rug could feel like luxury. You move your hand across a plank and feel splinters catch the tip of your glove. You picture small children trying to sleep on a structure like this. Not easy, not restful. Yet this was the reality for thousands. Another gust hits the cabin and the roof creaks loudly. The sound is not pleasant. It is the kind that makes you tilt your head and wonder if you should stand under a sturdier part of the room. Roofs were often covered with sod in the Old West, heavy blocks of earth and grass layered on top of thin rafters. When snow piled on top of sod, the weight became alarming. You look up and see a faint dusting of powder falling from between the beams. Nothing dangerous yet, but unsettling. You imagine yourself lying here trying to sleep while the noise echoes through the darkness. Every pop, every crack, every groan of shifting logs would sound like the start of disaster. You step toward the corner where a set of pegs jut from the wall. On one hangs a coat stiffened by cold, and next to it a pair of mittens with worn fingertips. You touch the coat and find it crisp with frost. Whoever lived here must have rushed inside just before the storm hit, stripping off layers and praying the fire would hold. You drift back toward the bedding. The straw mattress calls to you again, though not in a comfortable way. You kneel and push your hand against it. It is uneven with clumps of straw pushed to the edges. Sometimes settlers refilled mattresses each season, but often they kept the same one far longer than ideal. Straw broke down, settled strangely, grew dusty or damp, and occasionally housed insects that were too polite to leave. Sleeping on one of these during a blizzard required acceptance. You would not get comfort. You would get function. You step closer to the wall behind the bedding. More cold slips in here. You picture settlers working in the evenings to seal these gaps. They used anything: moss, mud, horsehair mixed with clay, bits of cloth, even ash mixed into paste. You breathe in and imagine the smell of freshly applied mud drying near the fire, earthy and raw. You imagine the taste of dust settling on your tongue as wind vibrates the logs. You run your fingers along the cracks and think about the balance settlers walked. Too much ceiling and the air inside grew stale, smoky, and difficult to breathe. Too little ceiling and the cold took over. They had to find the sweet spot with almost no guidance. No manuals, no weather forecasts. Only instinct and the occasional bit of advice traded along wagon trails or borrowed from Indigenous neighbors. The storm outside deepens. You can hear it. The wind sounds more frustrated now, as if annoyed that you found even this tiny bit of shelter. Snow strikes the shutters like handfuls of sand. You take a step to the window and gently press your hand against the cold glass. The frost patterns have taken over, spreading branches and swirls across the pane. Through the foggy shapes, you see nothing but white flicker and blur. The storm has swallowed the world. You stand still, listening. Wood shifts behind you. Something rattles on the roof. A distant crack echoes from the forest outside. It might be a tree falling under the weight of snow, or might be the sound of the wind twisting branches. You think of the settlers who lay awake during nights like this, listening, waiting, wondering if the structure would last until morning. The fire sputters, and you kneel to add another piece of wood. Sparks leap gently upward. Heat wraps around your hands, but your shoulders still feel chilled. You glance toward the mattress again. Eventually, even the bravest settlers had to lie down and hope the walls kept the night outside. You inhale slowly, letting your breath mix with the warm air. Your thoughts linger on the sensory experience. The warmth touches your face but leaves your back cold. The smell of smoke lingers on your clothing. The taste of dryness clings to your throat. Your eyelids grow slightly heavy, though not enough for sleep. The cabin is too alive, too fragile, too eager to remind you of the stakes. You sit again and listen, learning the rhythm of the structure. Every creak is a story. Every draft is a warning. Every warm pocket of air is a gift. Tonight you discover how settlers lived in the space between constant cold and fragile protection. Sleep was never guaranteed. It was earned. You drift toward the bedding corner again, drawn by curiosity rather than comfort. The straw mattress looks lumpy and worn, the sort of thing that dares you to try lying on it. You crouch and lift a corner of the rough fabric cover. The straw inside is a tangled mass, flattened in some places and stubbornly poking through in others. You picture someone gathering this material months ago, stuffing it in hurriedly before the first frost. It never crossed their mind that a future stranger would be lifting it, inspecting it, judging its softness or lack thereof. A mainstream historical fact settles in your thoughts. Most frontier families slept on ticking sacks filled with whatever they had available. Straw was common, but grass, pine needles, cattail fluff, or even shredded corn husks could serve as mattress stuffing. Settlers had to replace this filling frequently, sometimes every season, because it compacted and turned musty. You push your palm down. The mattress barely gives. It feels like sleeping on a bundle of broom bristles that pretends to be helpful. You run your hand along the side and imagine what bedtime must have felt like for the settlers who lived here. They probably sank onto this rough surface after hours of heavy work, not expecting comfort. The aches of long days merged with the lopsided support of their bedding, and they drifted into broken sleep simply because exhaustion insisted. You notice a faint, musty smell, the sort that clings to old haylofts and slow-drying barns. It is not unpleasant, just earthy and familiar. A quirky tidbit stirs in your memory. Some settlers believed sprinkling dried mint or lavender into their bedding would deter insects. Others claimed that hiding a bit of tobacco inside the straw stopped bedbugs from taking over. Whether these methods worked, or whether people simply hoped they did, is a detail historians still debate whenever they examine frontier journals and letters. You smile faintly at the thought, even in the harshest conditions, humans look for tiny comforts. A handful of scented leaves could feel like a luxury. You stand and reach for the blanket piled nearby. It is rough wool, heavy and scratchy. When you lift it, the fibers cling to your gloves, catching on tiny burrs. The blanket feels cold, the kind of cold that sinks into your fingertips. You hold it close to the fire until a hint of warmth creeps through. Settlers often slept with several layers of blankets, quilts, and patched cloth all stacked together. Some quilts were beautiful, stitched from scraps of dresses or shirts. Others were just whatever existed, sewn together for warmth. You wrap the blanket loosely around your shoulders and step away from the fire. Immediately the cold clings to your legs, reminding you that warmth has boundaries inside this room. You imagine curling up on the straw mattress with this wool pressed around you, your knees hugged to your chest, your breath forming a tiny personal cloud of moisture. Even with all of that, you would wake periodically from cold pockets drifting across your back. The wind pushes sharply against the cabin again, rattling a loose board on the wall. You stop and listen. The storm shifts tone, becoming deeper and more insistent. You walk toward the window and brush your sleeve across the frosty pane. The blizzard outside looks thicker than before, flakes flying sideways in a furious dance. It reminds you that bedding in a situation like this was not about softness or luxury. It was about survival. You turn away from the window and notice another small detail. A wooden box sits near the mattress. You open it slowly. Inside, you find handfuls of dried plant fibers, perhaps leftover stuffing from a previous season. You sift through it, hearing the faint rustle of dry materials sliding between your fingers. This was the frontier version of spare bedding. If the mattress compressed too much, settlers would loosen the ticking sack and refill it. They might do this in midwinter if the weather allowed. Otherwise, they would simply endure. You sit on the mattress for a moment, testing its stubbornness beneath you. It does not soften under your weight. It pushes back, reminding you that comfort was a fleeting concept in the Old West. You shift from side to side, imagining trying to fall asleep on something like this while the cabin shudders and the wind howls. Perhaps exhaustion made it easier, perhaps fear made it harder. You lean back on your hands and gaze at the braided rug beneath your boots. Rugs like this were often made from strips of worn clothing, braided together and stitched into circles or ovals. They were meant to protect feet from cold flooring, to trap heat, and to brighten a room that rarely saw color. You slide your foot across its surface and feel how stiff the fibers have become in the cold. It is still warmer than the floor, though, and your toes appreciate the difference. You rise again and return to the fire. Your shoulders shake slightly from the chill, and your breath feels heavier. You feed another piece of wood into the flames and watch as the glow strengthens. Settlers often slept as close to the fire as they safely could. Sometimes entire families arranged themselves in a semicircle around the hearth, rotating positions during the night, so everyone got their turn in the warmest spot. Your gaze drifts back to the mattress. You step toward it again and lower yourself slowly, easing into a reclined position. The straw crunches beneath your weight. It shifts awkwardly, creating small ridges under your shoulders. You adjust, then adjust again. Eventually you find a position that feels less like lying on a pile of sticks. You close your eyes briefly and inhale the smells of the room. Smoke, wool, dust, aging straw, a hint of cold pine. There is something calming about it, even if the comfort is mild. You open your eyes and study the ceiling. The beams above are rough cut, with bits of bark still clinging to them. Snow thuds softly now and then as it slides off or shifts weight. You imagine the roof bending slightly under the pressure. Nights like this must have made every sleeper hyper-aware of the sounds above and around them. A cabin was strong, but it was also vulnerable. You sit up and let your feet dangle over the mattress edge. You notice a small cloth bag tucked beneath the bedding. Curious, you pull it out and loosen the tie. Dried herbs spill into your palm. Perhaps this was someone's attempt to sweeten the air or calm the nerves. People used what they had. A few herbs, a warm drink, a story shared by firelight. Small rituals helped them sleep, even when the world outside felt hostile. You stand, stretch your arms, and move back to the fire. You savor the sudden warmth that grabs your chest and face. You think about how settlers layered blankets, hides, straw, and clothing in attempts to trap heat. They did not have electric heaters or insulated mattresses. They had grit, improvisation, and hope that the storm would eventually pass. You walk one more circuit around the room, touching the worn surfaces, listening to the storm, imagining the weight of life lived here. Bedding in the Old West was not soft, not luxurious, not always clean, but it mattered. It offered hope. It offered rest. And on nights like this, even the roughest mattress felt like a lifeline. You move closer to the pile of animal hides folded near the hearth, drawn by their dense heft and the memory of countless stories about frontier winter nights. When you lift one, the weight surprises you. It pulls down on your arms like a sleeping creature. The fur brushes your knuckles, soft on the surface yet thick with an underlayer built for survival. Buffalo robes were the frontier equivalent of modern thermal blankets, and tonight you feel exactly why. The air inside the cabin is icy enough that your breath still forms a faint mist, and the hide seems to drink that cold from your hands and give back something warmer. You spread the robe across your lap and marvel at its construction. Early settlers relied heavily on hides, particularly buffalo, elk, or deer, because fabric was scarce and expensive until trade routes grew. One well-documented detail from frontier life was that buffalo hides could last for years, offering insulation strong enough that many families slept under nothing else through entire winters. The robe you handle now carries a faint, earthy scent, a mix of fur, smoke, and old weather. You run your fingers through the fur, imagining the nights when settlers wrapped themselves like cocooned insects, hoping their own body heat would rebound off the dense fibers. The hides did more than warm. They shielded families from drafts, muffled the creaks of unsettled walls, and turned primitive beds into something almost cozy. You lift the edge and pull it around your shoulders. The warmth hits quickly, drawing a quiet exhale from your lungs. You glance toward the door and imagine a settler returning home through thigh-deep snow, hanging this robe on a wooden peg and letting the frost melt off while the fire crackled. Many frontier accounts mention hides stiffening like wooden planks when left outside too long. People sometimes had to beat the fur with sticks to soften it again. A curious snippet from period journals hints that children occasionally used these frozen hides as makeshift slides, dragging them through snowbanks until parents scolded them for ruining precious bedding. Whether they truly ruined anything or whether parents simply worried about risking their best winter gear is something researchers still discuss when studying daily life on the plains. You shift the robe slightly, feeling how it molds to your shape. It is heavier than any modern blanket, almost like a companion leaning against you. The weight brings an unexpected sense of safety. You picture sleeping beneath several of these, with only your nose exposed to the cold air. If the fire died overnight, the robes might be the only barrier between comfort and frostbite. The storm outside deepens, the wind turning into long, steady pushes against the walls. You hear snow sliding, pressing, shifting. You tighten the hide around your frame, appreciating how it traps heat that would otherwise flee. Settlers often placed hides both above and below them, knowing that cold floors stole warmth faster than open air. A hide under the body served as a primitive mattress pad, minimizing heat loss. A fur cover above sealed the arrangement like a winter envelope. You stand and walk toward the straw mattress again, dragging the robe behind you like a trailing shadow. When you lower it onto the bedding, the fur spreads into a thick, luxurious-looking layer that instantly makes the straw appear more inviting. You lie down carefully, letting the hide wrap around your shoulders, your chest, your legs. The sensation is immediate. Heat collects between your ribs and arms, too subtle to call hot, but strong enough to soothe. You close your eyes for a brief moment. Through the robe, you feel the faint crunch of straw and the roughness of the fabric ticking. The robe softens everything, its warmth seeping through your clothing. You imagine lying like this while the storm threatens to rip the shutters off the windows. Many frontier families slept in layers, sometimes alternating robe, blanket, robe, quilt. robe again. Those with fewer resources might share one hide among several people, rotating who got the warmest spot each night. The fire pops behind you, sending a brief spark of light across the ceiling. You sit up again, pulling the robe tighter. You run your hand along the thick hair, noticing how it catches the glow. The colors shift from brown to deep gold to near black, depending on the angle. You sense the presence of the animal that once roamed the plains. It is one of the few connections settlers had to warmth that nature provided for free. You stand and fold the robe loosely around your body, pacing slowly across the cabin floor. The hide muffles the cold air moving near your legs. It smells faintly of tallow and smoke, as though it remembers being part of someone's winter ritual. Period letters often mention how hides became softer and more comfortable with time, absorbing smoke from the hearth until they carried the scent of home. You turn toward the small wooden chair and sit, robe still wrapped around you. The warmth that presses against your back reminds you how settlers often leaned over their bedding before sleeping, warming the hides near the fire for several minutes so they could bring that heat with them. It was a makeshift version of modern heated blankets. You lift one corner of the hide and feel how the fur retains heat from your body already. The storm slams another wave of wind against the cabin, and the entire structure hums quietly. You pull the robe closer and glance toward the ceiling, half expecting snow to drift through the beams. Nights like this tested every stitch, every rope, every nail. Sleep could come only when the body surrendered, not when the mind believed it was safe. The robe on your shoulders makes that surrender feel more plausible. You rise again and check the edges of the room. Cold gathers near the floor and along the lower logs, drifting in like unwelcome guests. You press your foot against one spot and feel a miniature breeze. Under normal conditions, this draft might be annoying. Tonight it borders on dangerous. A thick hide thrown across the lower wall might block the worst of it. You drape the robe temporarily against the seam, imagining how settlers improvised insulation with whatever they had. Rugs, sacks, quilts, and hides often doubled as wind barriers. You retrieve the robe again and bring it back to your body. The warmth now is more pronounced, clinging to your chest. You picture wrapping yourself in several layers, then lying close to the fire with your feet pointed toward the hearth. Some families reportedly heated stones in the fire, wrapped them in cloth, and tucked them under the blankets near their feet. Others placed hides directly on heated rocks to warm them before sleep. It was an old trick borrowed from many indigenous traditions, though historians remain divided over which groups influenced which techniques first. You settle once more on the edge of the mattress, hide nestled around you like a shield. You stroke the fur absently, imagining how many nights settlers must have whispered stories beneath these layers. Tales of lost travelers, of wolves circling cabins, of distant relatives on the trail. These stories softened fear just enough to coax dreams into existence. The fire continues to glow, and you sit quietly, letting the robe hug your shoulders. You breathe in its scent, the mix of earth and smoke that feels both ancient and grounding. Outside, the blizzard continues to rage, but inside this cocoon of fur, you sense a small, stubborn refuge. Sleep in the Old West never came easily during storms, but hides like this made the attempt possible. You finally rise, shake out the robe gently, and drape it across the mattress, as though preparing for the night yourself. The storm can scream all it wants. For now, you have learned one of the oldest secrets of frontier sleeping. Survival was often wrapped in fur. You return to the fire, drawn again by the pulse of warmth that feels like the only steady thing inside this restless cabin. The logs glow orange at the core, their edges crumbling into soft flakes of ember. You kneel and feel the temperature rise sharply as your hands hover above the flames. For a moment you imagine stretching out right here, letting the heat lull you into sleep. In the Old West, many families did exactly that. A small hearth was not just for cooking. It was the midnight guardian, the heart of the home, the one place where cold dared not intrude. You shift closer, letting your knees press against the uneven floor. Early frontier settlers built fireplaces with whatever stone they could gather nearby, shaping them crudely but effectively. One widely recorded detail from the period notes that many hearths were constructed too shallow or too wide, which caused sparks to leap farther into the room. You look down at the burn marks scattered around the fire pit and understand immediately how this happened. A poorly placed ember could ignite a blanket or hide. Fire warmed the settlers, but it also kept them nervous. You reach for the poker leaning against the hearth and tap one of the logs. A shower of sparks spirals upward, lighting the rafters for a heartbeat. The noise merges with the distant groaning of wind outside. You add another piece of split wood, pushing it firmly into the glowing pile. The fire accepts it hungrily. Cooking fires did double duty during winter nights, first filling the cabin with dinner's aroma, then simmering low until morning. Settlers depended on the embers not just for heat but as a source of light. When the storm raged like it does now, stumbling in darkness could be just as dangerous as stepping outside. You sit back and imagine a family gathering here in the cold months. Parents often arranged children closest to the hearth, curling their small bodies like kittens around the warmest area. Adults slept farther from the flames, accepting the chill because they felt responsible for tending the fire through the night. Some diaries mention mothers waking every hour to adjust the fuel, feeding tiny sticks quietly so their children would not stir. A lesser-known frontier observation suggests that people sometimes slept in rotations, with one adult always awake to coax the fire if it started to fade. Whether this was a common practice or something families improvised during severe storms is something cultural historians still examine with interest. You stretch your legs toward the flames and feel heat seep into your boots. The leather softens slightly as it warms. You lean back, closing your eyes for just a moment, letting the crackle sink into your ears. The rhythm is steady, calming, almost hypnotic. It is easy to imagine drifting into sleep like this, your face warmed, while your back shivers from the cold behind you. This uneven heat was a hallmark of frontier living. Too close to the fire and you risked singeing clothing or overheating one side of your body. Too far away, and the cold stole everything your blankets fought to keep. You shift to the side and glance at the simple iron tools beside the hearth. A skillet, a small pot, a ladle blackened with use. These would have cooked stews that lingered overnight, thick broths meant to stay warm as long as possible. You breathe in deeply and almost taste the ghost of simmered beans and venison. Many families left stew pots tucked into the coals, so the contents would remain edible until dawn. It saved fuel, saved labor, and served as a midnight comfort for anyone who woke shivering. You touch the hearthstones lightly. They are warm, but not hot. Settlers sometimes slept with their feet on stones, heated earlier in the evening. The stones radiated slow heat through the night like miniature suns tucked beneath blankets. You imagine pulling a buffalo hide over your legs, while your toes rest against one of these stones. There is something deeply human about seeking warmth in whatever the landscape offers. The fire pops loudly, snapping you from your thoughts. A sliver of ember skitters across the floor before dying in silence. You watch it fade and think about how many settlers feared chimney drafts. Smoke backflowed easily if the wind struck at the wrong angle. Some wrote about nights when the entire cabin filled with smoke, forcing the occupants to crawl along the floor to breathe. You inhale carefully, assessing the room. The chimney here seems steady enough. The smoke rises cleanly, disappearing into the dark flue. You sit back again, arms loosely wrapped around your torso. The warmth feels uneven but welcome. You glance toward one corner of the cabin, where a soot stain climbs the wall. Perhaps the fire once flared too high. Perhaps someone left a pot too close to the flames. Little marks like this tell a story about the people who lived here, the moments they battled both cold and heat, trying to find a balance. You rise and walk around behind the hearth, noticing how the back wall feels colder than the front. The stones shield heat from escaping, but they also trap cold drafts when the wind shifts. You press your palm to the wall and feel the temperature drop sharply. This contrast reminds you why families congregated so close to the fire at night. The further corners of cabins were sometimes near freezing, even when the hearth blazed bright. You imagine yourself lying on the floor, head toward the fire, feet tucked beneath a hide. You picture the gentle rhythm of embers breathing in and out as they glow. You wonder how many people whispered quiet prayers before closing their eyes, asking the flames to hold until dawn. Heat was never taken for granted. It was earned through chopping, hauling, splitting, stacking. If you wanted a warm night, you worked for it during the day. You sit again and unwind your shoulders. You can almost feel the scratch of cold fabric brushing your neck, the stiffness of your coat thawing near the fire. You inhale deeply, letting the scent of smoke settle inside your lungs. The warmth eases the tension in your hips, your hands, your jaw. You imagine the stillness creeping in, that slow drift towards sleepiness that frontier people cherish during long storms. The fire fades slightly, its brightness turning mellow. You poke at the logs again, encouraging them. As you watch the flames rise, you notice the way they cast shadows across the room. Each flicker changes the cabin's shape, making the walls seem to shift. In a place this dark, illusions were common. Some settlers swore they saw figures moving in the firelight, shapes that vanished when stared at directly. Whether this came from fear, exhaustion, or the mind's attempt to animate isolation is something social historians have pondered when studying frontier psychology. You push your boots closer to the warmth. The snowstorm howls outside, louder now, as if trying to drown out the crackling fire. You hold your position calmly, letting heat soak into your spine. You imagine the family who once lived here, gathered in this very spot, breathing in unison while the fire protected them. You can almost hear children murmuring sleepy questions, the soft clank of a pot lid settling, the rustle of blankets as bodies shifted to find the warmest angle. Slowly, you stand and stretch your arms overhead. The warmth from the fire lingers on your skin, even as cold air brushes the back of your neck. You turn once more to face the flames and let the last rush of heat settle over your cheeks. This hearth mattered. It was the difference between endurance and defeat. It was the silent companion that kept settlers alive through the kind of nights that swallowed the world. The fire continues its steady song, the heartbeat of the cabin. And for a moment, as you watch it dance, you feel as though you could sleep here too, guarded by its glow. You leave the hearth's glow and move toward the wider open space of the cabin, imagining how a family might arrange themselves at bedtime during a storm like this. The cold rushes at you as soon as you step away from the fire, brushing your skin with its sharp, intrusive fingers. You wrap your arms around yourself, the way settlers must have done as they hurried from task to task before settling down together. Tonight reminds you why isolation was rarely an option in the Old West. Warmth was a communal project. You picture bedrolls spreading across the floor, hides stacked near the wall, and a rough quilt or two draped over the straw mattress. In most frontier homes, space was limited, and it was common for everyone to sleep near each other, almost forming a breathing, shifting cluster of limbs and blankets. One frequently referenced detail from frontier diaries describes how children often burrowed between adults during winter nights, turning themselves into tiny, living heaters. You smile faintly at the thought. The cold outside might be ruthless, but human closeness softened its edge. You crouch down beside the straw mattress, imagining several sleepers sharing it. The straw crunches under your weight, and you realize how tight space becomes when 3, 4, or even 5 people lie side by side. You run your palm along the hide you laid earlier and think about the warmth of bodies layered beneath and above. Families often placed their youngest at the center, where heat concentrated most efficiently. Adults curled toward them, creating a protective ring. The arrangement was strategic as much as affectionate. You sit on the floor and close your eyes for a moment, trying to feel the presence of others. The storm outside slams a burst of wind against the wall, making it shudder. The cabin feels enormous in its emptiness, but you can almost sense silhouettes around you. You imagine the soft breaths of sleeping parents, a child mumbling quietly in a dream, perhaps even a guest or traveler allowed a corner near the hearth just for the night. Frontier hospitality practically demanded sharing space, especially in winter. To refuse someone shelter during a blizzard was considered inhumane. You touch the floor and feel cold seeping through your glove. Settlers often lined the sleeping area with extra hides or thick quilts. Even livestock blankets sometimes came indoors when conditions were severe enough. A small yet captivating note found in a few homestead logs mentions that some families tucked their dogs beneath blankets at night, not only for affection, but because the animal's heat was too valuable to waste. Whether this was a widespread practice or something unique to a few households remains an open question among researchers, especially since many journals failed to mention animals except in practical contexts. You stand and mimic the act of arranging bedding. You pull one hide here, shift a blanket there, making an imaginary nest. The warmth from the hearth flickers across your hands, and for a moment, you feel how comforting the communal pile must have been. Sleeping alone in a place like this would feel almost reckless. Shared warmth meant shared safety. You lie down again, this time imagining your shoulder pressed to someone else's, your feet tucked under multiple layers. Families learned how to synchronize their breathing, how to shift positions without waking everyone, how to quietly adjust layers when drafts slipped through the walls. You inhale deeply, sensing the ghost of smoke, wool, and earth all mingling together. The cabin floor vibrates slightly as a heavy gust hits the wall. You glance toward the door. Settlers sometimes braced it with a wooden beam during storms like this, not because intruders lurked, but because the wind itself could rattle latches loose. You imagine the sound of everyone stirring when a gust made the door thump, whispered voices, a worried question or two, and then bodies huddling closer until the trembling stopped. You lie back fully, staring at the rafters. When several people slept in the same room, warmth rose quickly. The air near the ceiling could grow surprisingly mild, while the floor remained bitterly cold. You brush your fingers along your arm, feeling your skin warming where it touches the hide. Heat from your own body pools beneath the layers, strengthening slowly. You think about the emotional side of this closeness. During storms that lasted 3 days or more, sleep became a collective ritual. People told stories before bed, sang low songs, or spoke about memories from home. A gentle anecdote preserved in a few pioneer letters mentions families keeping a sleeping order so that siblings took turns sleeping closest to the fire. Whether this was out of fairness or necessity depends on the account, but the idea reveals how structured their nights could be. You roll onto your side, pulling the hide nearer to your chin. You feel the weight of it settle across your ribs. You imagine another person shifting beside you, their elbow brushing your forearm, their blanket brushing your shoulder. Life in the Old West erased most notions of personal space during winter. People simply adapted. A draft snakes across your neck, making you shiver. You turn your head and notice a small gap between two logs, where cold air seeps through relentlessly. Settlers likely compensated by pressing hides or folded quilts against such gaps. You stand and imitate the gesture, pushing the hide gently into place. The cold lessens slightly. You picture someone waking at midnight and doing the same, half asleep, instinctively protecting the sleeping pile. You return to the mattress and lie down again. The air hums with quietness now, the storm settling for a brief moment before its next strike. You feel yourself sinking deeper into the role of a frontier sleeper. You imagine clutching someone's hand under the blankets when thunder cracked outside. For families living far from towns, storms brought a mixture of fear and connection. They reminded people how fragile survival could be, and how necessary others were. You exhale slowly, your breath warm against the blanket. A lesser-known cultural reference from the region suggests that some families believed warmth traveled through touch more effectively if everyone maintained steady breathing. Whether this held any scientific merit or was simply a comforting belief, no one can say with certainty. Contemporary historians offer differing interpretations, especially since folklore and practical survival habits often blended indistinguishably in the Old West. You stretch your legs beneath the hide and feel the layers shift. The mattress pokes at your shoulder blade, but the weight of the hide compensates. The imagined presence of sleepers around you brings a kind of calm. You can almost hear breathing, almost sense heat radiating from others in the darkness. As the fire crackles again behind you, you slowly sit up. The communal huddle was more than a method of survival. It was the nightly reminder that people were not alone on a harsh frontier. Shared warmth meant shared burdens, shared fears, shared victories. And on nights when storms tried to break the world apart, the simple act of leaning into another person's warmth was enough to keep danger at bay. You rise from the bedding, adjusting the hide on your shoulders. The storm begins to howl again, louder now, but you feel steadier. You have seen how frontier families stood against it together, curled up tightly, trusting in what little they had, and trusting in each other. Sleep in the Old West was a collective negotiation with the cold, and tonight, you understand why no one tried to face it alone. You move toward the far wall where the wind rattles persistently, and you feel the cold pushing through the gaps with unkind confidence. The temperature inside the cabin drops with every gust, and you understand why settlers sometimes relied on something that, to a modern mind, feels completely backwards. Snow, piles of it, intentionally banked against the exterior walls. You step closer to the window and press your palm to the cold glass. The frost stings your skin instantly, reminding you that out here, every tool mattered, even the ones nature delivered in brutal quantities. You imagine stepping outside for a moment, into that screaming white blur. Snowflakes whip at your face, the wind claws at your coat, and yet, in the middle of this chaos, you kneel down and start scooping snow with your bare hands, pushing it toward the cabin walls to build a bank of frozen insulation. One consistent observation from frontier weather records is that snow, when packed tightly, traps heat remarkably well. Indigenous nations had known this long before settlers arrived, and their winter shelters often used snow intentionally, sometimes shaping it, sometimes burying it. Settlers copied the idea, though often out of desperation rather than design. You step back from the window and look around the cabin, imagining the outside, buried up to the sill. Snow presses inward, sealing cracks, slowing drafts, and muffling the storm. You breathe out slowly, almost tasting the cold air you expect to seep under the door. The idea of snow as a helper feels strange. You picture a young settler, perhaps a teenager, being told by a parent to shovel drifts against the house, despite the storm's fury. They might have muttered under their breath, unable to understand why anyone would add more snow to an already impossible night. You run your hand along the lower logs where the cold is strongest. Snow outside would act like a thick blanket, surrounding the cabin with trapped pockets of still air. The same principle behind igloos was at work here. A lesser-known frontier practice, described in a few surviving letters, mentions families intentionally piling snow shoulder-high around the cabin for wind control. The snow reduced drafts so effectively that the inside temperature rose by several degrees. Whether families discovered this through experimentation or observation remains uncertain, and environmental historians still examine which regions adopted the technique widely and which resisted it due to fear of collapse. You crouch at the base of the wall, imagining the snow pressing against it like a protective shield. Your fingertips feel tiny drafts sneaking through, not enough to freeze you, but enough to keep you awake on a night when sleep matters most. In this kind of cold, every breath steals warmth from your lungs. You lift your head and look toward the hearth, watching the fire sputter. You sense how valuable even a small reduction in drafts would be. Snow, as unlikely as it seems, made the difference between huddling in misery and finding just enough comfort to drift into shallow sleep. You stand again and brush your palms together. You picture yourself as a settler during a storm like this, stepping outside with a shovel or bare arms to push snow into place. The wind howls, punishing each movement. Flakes stick instantly to your eyelashes. The temperature bites like a starving wolf, and yet you continue, because you know the cabin's walls are thin and the night is long. You know that if the fire weakens, those few inches of packed snow might be all that stands between your family and frostbite. You turn toward the door, studying the frame. A thick bank of snow outside would also block the bottom gap. Settlers often stuffed fabric or moss along the threshold, but storms forced them to do more. You picture someone pushing snow right up against the door with their boots, pressing it flush until only the upper hinge remained visible. One intriguing anecdote preserved in a winter journal from the Dakotas describes settlers intentionally burying half the door during storms, then digging themselves out in the morning. Whether this practice was widespread or an isolated quirk of unusually daring homesteaders still prompts debate among regional historians who examine the cultural differences in how newcomers adapted to the plains. You cross the room and touch the wall again, closing your eyes. With snow banked outside, the cabin interior would grow quieter too. Heavy drifts absorbed sound. Instead of the violent shriek of wind, you might hear only a low, muffled hum, like the world outside had pulled a blanket over its head. You imagine lying on the straw mattress, wrapped in hides, listening to the softened storm instead of its full fury. The psychological relief would have been immense. Winter storms were frightening, but when the sound dulled, even slightly, sleep became more reachable. You move toward the window and picture the scene more clearly. Outside, snow piles halfway up the glass, glowing faintly under moonlight whenever the storm thins. The world becomes dimmer, quieter, more enclosed. You place your palm on the sill again. The cold is still strong, but you imagine how much worse it would feel without snow pressed against the outer logs. Snowbanks created a temporary cave, a small fortress of frozen protection. You step away from the window and squat beside the wall, imagining yourself pushing a hide against the interior seam. People combined multiple techniques: snow outside, hides inside, blankets nailed temporarily along the edges, anything to reduce the icy fingers sneaking in. You inhale deeply and sense the air thickening near the floor. The fire warms the room unevenly. You picture heat struggling to rise, only to be eaten by the drafts. Snow outside helped slow that escape. As you walk across the cabin, you imagine it half buried, the roof covered several feet deep, the walls pressed by drifts, the door nearly hidden. Settlers sometimes feared that too much snow might collapse the structure, and that fear was not unfounded. But many still took the risk, knowing that cold was a more immediate enemy. A winter anecdote from an Illinois settler tells of waking to find the entire cabin nearly invisible from outside, the doorway sealed by wind-blown drifts so high that the family had to tunnel out. Whether this event was exaggerated or recorded faithfully is something folklorists still try to parse when comparing period accounts. You kneel again near the hearth, letting the warmth soak into you. You imagine how snow transformed the atmosphere inside. Warmer, quieter, dimmer, more like a den than a house. You can almost hear the muffled storm, a softened growl instead of a roar. The interior becomes a cocoon, a pocket of borrowed warmth inside an unkind world. You rise slowly and trace the log seams with your palm. You imagine yourself adding the final touch, a hide pinned here, a blanket draped there, the exterior buried in white. The cabin becomes something different, transformed from a fragile wooden box into a winter shelter shaped by necessity and instinct. A gentle calm settles over you as you picture lying down again on the straw mattress, the cold held at bay by natural insulation. You close your eyes briefly, listening to the muted sounds of a blizzard that cannot fully enter. The Old West demanded creativity from everyone who called it home, and tonight you have seen how settlers learned to accept help even from the very thing trying to freeze them. You open your eyes and glance around the steadying room. Snow outside may be fierce, but inside, the world finally feels a little less cold. You walk toward the door and feel a draft cutting along the floor like a thin blade, reminding you that nightfall on the frontier was not a gentle transition. It was a checklist, a ritual, a test. You stand there for a moment and imagine the last frantic errands settlers rushed through before they dared to lie down. Sleep was not a simple act when storms like this prowled outside. It was something earned through effort, through preparation, through the daily battle against a landscape that loved to remind people how small they were. You reach for the wooden bar beside the doorframe, the kind settlers often used to reinforce the latch when winds grew violent. You slide it into place, hearing the dull thud as it locks across the door. That sound alone would have comforted countless homesteaders. Securing the entrance meant the house was ready for the night, or at least as ready as it could be. One documented detail from pioneer housekeeping notes explains how settlers checked doors and windows multiple times during storms, because latches made from simple wood pegs often loosened when the cabin walls shifted under pressure. You rattle the door gently. It holds, but not with confidence. You crouch and seal the lower gap with a hide you drag over from the bedding corner. The fur blocks the draft instantly, puffing slightly as cold tries and fails to pass through. You press the hide firmly into place and imagine how someone might have done this every evening in winter. Routine tasks never stayed routine when survival depended on them. You stand and look around the cabin. The fire flickers, casting thin shadows across the walls. Before settlers slept, they tended the flames carefully. They added just enough fuel to keep it alive, but not so much that the embers would flare dangerously while everyone rested. You kneel by the hearth and poke the logs gently, adjusting them until the fire settles into a steady glow. Period journals often mention how adults watched the flames until their eyes burned, unwilling to drift off until they were certain the fire would behave. Even a single spark landing on a hide could change everything. You rise again and head toward the window. Frost patterns creep across the glass like tiny white branches. You press your palm to it and feel the cold bite instantly. Settlers often scraped frost away before bed to ensure the pane had no cracks or gaps forming beneath the ice. A curious example from an Ohio homestead account describes families using the back of a spoon to gently chip away loose frost so they could inspect the edges. Whether this was typical or just one family's habit is uncertain, but it shows how important these small checks were. You turn from the window and head toward the roof beam, where a long pole lies against the wall. You lift it and look upward. Snow thuds softly against the shingles. Some families, especially those with sod roofs, used poles to tap loose snow from the top, so weight would not build dangerously overnight. You mimic the motion, gently tapping the beam above you. Loose flakes drift down, sparkling briefly in the firelight. The light snowfall inside the cabin reminds you how fragile these structures could be when storms lasted for days. You move toward the woodpile stacked neatly beside the hearth. You run your hand along the split logs. Settlers always checked their wood supply before sleep. Running out of fuel in the middle of a blizzard meant rising into freezing air to chop more, a risk no one wanted. One lesser-known insight from frontier accounts indicates that many families set aside a night stack, a small pile of carefully dried pieces chosen for slow, steady burning. Whether every household used this method remains unclear, as sources vary wildly from region to region, but the idea feels perfectly sensible in this moment. You gather a few pieces and place them beside the hearth within easy reach. Then you lift the kettle resting on the stones, feeling the remaining warmth in its handle. Hot water was precious at night. You imagine yourself filling it earlier in the evening, letting it steam while the family prepared for bed. Warm drinks soothed dry throats and offered a moment of calm when the cabin rattled under the storm's assault. You place the kettle back gently and move toward the moaning wall where wind presses hardest. You press your ear to the logs. The cold hums through the wood. It sounds alive, as if the storm itself hums a warning. You step back and scan for any visible gaps. You notice one narrow crack near a roof beam. You reach up and push a scrap of fabric into the gap, feeling it wedged tightly. Simple tasks like this filled the last hour before bed, the kind of maintenance that settlers performed half out of habit and half out of fear. You turn toward the center of the room, listening as the wind shifts again. The fire pops, the door groans, the roof creaks with the weight of snow. You imagine a family pausing every few minutes to check these sounds, debating whether to reposition bedding further from the wall or whether to add another hide against the seam. Sleep needed preparation, but it also needed courage. You walk to the cabin's small loft ladder. Many frontier homes used lofts as sleeping spaces during winter because warm air rose and collected there. You climb a few rungs and feel the difference almost immediately. The air near the ceiling is warmer, softer, easier to breathe. You picture children being sent up first, their small hands gripping these same rungs, their voices drifting softly as they settled under blankets. Some families carried embers wrapped in metal containers up to the loft so children would not freeze during the night. You pause on the ladder, imagining the faint rustle of quilts and the giggles that sometimes slipped out before parents hushed them. You climb down and return to the heart of the cabin. The fire dims slightly, throwing a red glow across your hands. You notice the shadows tremble, shaped by the wind's uneven rhythm. You sense how settlers learned to read these shadows. A flicker might mean a draft getting stronger. A sudden swirl of smoke might signal a shift in the storm. Evening chores were not just tasks, they were the first line of communication with the weather. You kneel by the hearth again and add a final small log. You watch flame wrap around it slowly, gently. You feel heat on your face, cold on your back. That contrast becomes sharper each minute. It is a reminder to move deliberately, to check again, to be certain nothing is forgotten. You walk one slow circle around the cabin. You test the door. You test the walls. You glance up at the rafters. You run your hand across the bedding, smoothing it as though expecting others to follow. A quiet stillness settles across the room, just for a moment. The chores are done. The storm still roars, but the cabin has been prepared. You sit on the edge of the straw mattress and let out a long breath. You feel the weight of the night gathering, but you also feel a pulse of safety. Settlers earned this feeling every evening, through effort and vigilance. Only once everything was checked, sealed, adjusted, and warmed did they allow themselves to sink beneath blankets and hope the storm would stay outside. Tonight, you feel that same shift. The chores are complete. The storm is still hungry, but the cabin is ready. You sit quietly for a moment, feeling the weight of the storm pressing against the cabin, when another sound slips into your awareness. A distant howl, not the wind, something deeper, wilder. You rise slowly, stepping toward the door with a cautious instinct that countless settlers felt on nights just like this. Predators didn't wait for calm weather. In fact, storms sometimes emboldened them. The scent of livestock, the flicker of firelight, the weakened structures half buried in snow, all drew attention from the dark edges of the prairie. You press your hand against the rough wood of the door, listening. The howl fades, replaced by the raw hiss of wind curling around the corners of the cabin. Still, the possibility lingers. Wolves, coyotes, even the occasional mountain lion prowled near frontier homesteads during harsh winters, searching for anything desperate enough to leave shelter. One well-known detail from frontier writings explains how families commonly assigned night watches during severe storms, not only to tend the fire but to guard against animals testing the walls or sneaking toward the livestock pens. You imagine the unease of sitting by the window, peering into a world of swirling white, not knowing what moved out there. You take a slow step backward, scanning the shadows inside the cabin. Night watches weren't just about animals. Sometimes they were about sound, about reading the storm's behavior, about detecting whether the roof might sag. The shutters might loosen, or the fire might backdraft. You imagine rotating between waking and sleeping every few hours, the way grown men and women once did when storms threatened to outlast the night, not out of paranoia, but out of necessity. You sit on the chair near the hearth and look toward the window where the frost shimmers. Your ears search the storm for more howls, more signs of movement. The logs crackle, the roof settles, the fire snaps. Then, faintly, another noise, low and rolling, as if a creature breathes close to the wall. You tense instinctively, though you know it might just be wind bending the trees. Period settlers often mistook one sound for another. A peculiar note found in a Kansas settler's journal describes a night when the family stayed awake for hours. Convinced wolves circled the cabin, only to discover in the morning that the noise had come from snow sliding off the roof. Whether the memory was exaggerated or faithfully preserved remains a topic some folklorists debate when comparing regional winter tales. You rise again and approach the window, careful not to disturb the fragile frost patterns. You wipe a small patch with the tip of your glove, peering outside. White, endless, drifting white. Snow hits the glass in bursts, creating momentary shadows that resemble movement. You lean closer, heart pacing faster, imagining yourself watching the tree line for eyes glinting back. The wind moans again and you realize how settlers, isolated for miles in every direction, face the night with courage you can barely comprehend. No neighbors to call, no patrols to warn them, only thin wooden walls and their own ability to listen. And listening was a skill. They learned the difference between a shifting branch and a prowling predator, between the snap of freezing wood and the thud of hooves, between silence that meant calm and silence that meant something was stalking. You step away from the window and close your coat tighter. You picture a father or mother sitting exactly where you stand now, clutching a lantern while the others slept. The firelight slows your heartbeat. You settle on the edge of the straw mattress, still listening. A draft sneaks across your ankles, tugging you back to alertness. You adjust the hide blocking the doorframe and then check the shutter latch again. Settlers often walked these same paths inside their homes, circling quietly in the dim glow, confirming every weakness. You kneel beside the hearth and hold your palms toward the warmth. The fire's glow dances across the room, illuminating the corners where shadows gather and retreat. You imagine someone taking the first watch tonight, sitting in that same spot, warming their hands while watching for silhouettes through the window. A small family might take turns awake, whispering in low voices to avoid waking children. A lone traveler, stranded in a storm, might fight drowsiness with every breath, knowing sleep could invite danger. You rise once more and scan the ceiling beams. The wind rattles the structure again, and you imagine those parents pausing to interpret the sound. Was it a loose shingle, a shifting drift, or something stepping on the roof? Winter storms distorted reality. Sound traveled in unpredictable ways. One lesser-known observation, preserved in a few regional accounts, suggests that frozen air could amplify distant noises, making a wolf somewhere on the hillside sound like it stood right outside the door. Whether this phenomenon was caused by acoustics or imagination remains a point of curiosity among environmental historians. You approach the small wooden ladder leading to the loft. Settlers sometimes positioned their night watchers up there, so they had a better view of the room and the windows. You climb a few rungs and look down. The cabin seems smaller from above, but also safer, more defensible. You imagine a mother up here, rocking slightly as she keeps her eyes on the fire and her ears tuned to every sound. Maybe she clutches a tin cup of warm broth. Maybe she whispers a quiet prayer between gusts of wind. You descend again, feet tapping against the cool floor. You pick up a heavy iron tool resting near the hearth. Not exactly a weapon, but in the Old West, anything within reach doubled as protection. You set it down gently, listening once more. The wind swells, filling the cabin with a long breath of sound. Then, gradually, it fades into a softer moan. You exhale slowly. The danger outside might be real or imagined. Settlers had to accept that uncertainty. Sleep came only when the storm allowed it. You walk toward the door again and press your palm against the wood. You imagine feeling vibrations from paws landing lightly on fresh snow. You imagine the cold air carrying the scent of livestock from the nearby pen, luring hungry predators. You imagine the night watcher tightening their grip on the lantern, debating whether to peek outside or stay still. In most cases, they stayed inside, trusting the walls to hold until morning. You step back, your shoulders relaxing little by little. The storm drones on. Another small sound echoes, like a distant bark swallowed by wind. You tilt your head, studying its rhythm. You realize it could easily be a tree limb striking another, or the cabin's structure settling. The frontier demanded a strange mixture of caution and resilience. You had to react without panicking, listen without imagining too much, stay alert without losing your mind to the dark. You return to the mattress and sit, letting the tension in your muscles ease. You picture the family finally lying down together once the first watch assures the cabin is secure. Perhaps they whisper goodnight. Perhaps they say nothing at all. Perhaps only the watcher remains awake, leaning against the wall with a blanket draped around their shoulders, watching the fire breathe. You lie back slowly, your head sinking into the uneven straw. The cold at your side feels sharper now that your body has warmed slightly. You pull the hide across your chest and close your eyes. The storm still growls outside, but the cabin holds. You understand now why night watches existed. They were not only practical, they were comforting. Knowing someone remained awake made sleep possible for everyone else. You take a slow breath, feeling the rhythm of the cabin around you. The fire crackles, the wind rumbles, the night watcher within you listens. You drift somewhere between alertness and drowsiness. The place settlers occupied countless times during long blizzards. And though the storm roars, the danger remains outside. For now, the night watcher keeps you safe. You shift your weight on the straw mattress, letting the hide settle more comfortably over your chest, and your thoughts wander toward the smallest sleepers of the frontier. Children. You imagine their wide eyes during nights like this, when the storm growls against the cabin and the fire throws long fingers of shadow across the walls. You picture a child clutching a worn cloth doll or a carved wooden horse, trembling not from cold, but from the booming sound of wind rolling over the plains. You sit up slowly, feeling the roughness of the blanket at your back, and imagine the adults gathering their children close. Parents in the Old West understood that nighttime was its own kind of threat, separate from hunger and hard work. One frequently mentioned detail in pioneer family letters describes how parents used bedtime songs and gentle stories to distract children from the fear that storms inspired. Not lullabies of gentle meadows or twinkling stars, but songs rooted in comfort, warmth, and the promise of dawn. Short, repetitive melodies that soothed more than entertained. You kneel beside the mattress, picturing a mother humming near the fire. Her voice softens the roar outside, and the tone carries the weight of reassurance. A child curls beneath a buffalo robe, tiny hands gripping the fur, listening closely not just to the song, but to the cadence that says, "You are safe." You can almost hear the rhythm, low and steady, blending with the crackle of burning logs. You rise and step toward the hearth, imagining the glow on children's faces. Firelight twinkled in their eyes, turning fear into fascination. Some families shared stories instead of songs, tales that didn't always shy away from darkness, but reframed it. You kneel, place your hands near the fire, and think of the way these stories passed from parent to child. A peculiar example preserved in a small collection of frontier folk tales describes parents telling stories about winter spirits who patrolled the outside world to ensure children stayed safely indoors. Whether this came from creative parenting or genuine belief is uncertain, and cultural historians still explore how much of such winter lore reflected teaching methods versus superstition. You sit back on your heels and look toward the loft ladder. Many children slept up there, where the warmest air collected. You imagine their small bodies bundled together beneath quilts stitched from scraps of old shirts and dresses, voices whispering about the noises of the night. Some children were brave, pretending they enjoyed the storm's fury. Others buried their faces into their blankets whenever the wind hit the cabin too hard. You climb a few rungs of the ladder and pause, feeling the warmth rising toward your shoulders. You close your eyes and picture siblings sharing a single pillow stuffed with feathers or cattail fluff, listening to their parents below. A little cough here, a soft whine there, a blanket shifting, the kind of quiet, ordinary sounds that made them feel less alone. You can almost sense the sleepy weight of a child leaning unconsciously against another as dreams begin to form. You descend again, landing softly on the cool floor. You cross the room and crouch near the window, hearing the wind scrape against the shutters. Children were often afraid of these scraping sounds. They imagined claws, or ghosts, or giants walking through the drifts. You rest your palm against the cold sill and understand why parents worked so hard to mask these noises with songs or stories. The frontier did not provide insulation from sound. The night had a voice, and it spoke loudly. You step away from the window and sit on a folded pile of blankets, The smell of smoke and wool wraps around you like a memory. You imagine a child curling into their mother's lap, too anxious to sleep alone. Many families embraced this closeness. Even when space was limited, even when bodies pressed tightly together, the warmth of closeness was worth it. Domestic writings from the period frequently mention the comfort children found in sleeping beside older siblings or parents during harsh nights. It was not a sign of fearfulness. It was simply how life worked in a small wooden box, fighting the elements. You stretch your legs, letting the fire's warmth reach your toes, and imagine a father telling a story about spring, about green grass returning, about birds nesting in the roof beams. A gentle detail found in several prairie diaries mentions that parents often whispered hopeful images of warm weather to help children fall asleep. Whether these were memories or small acts of imagination is sometimes uncertain, and scholars analyze them as a blend of coping mechanism and oral tradition. You stand and wander to the center of the room, placing your hand on one of the log beams. You imagine children waking in the night, crying softly because the cold found its way through a blanket, or because a strange sound startled them. Parents rose without complaint, adjusting layers, checking the fire, whispering quiet comforts. The frontier demanded so much from adults, yet nighttime care was one of the most constant responsibilities they carried. You feel a pang of understanding. Storms didn't pause for exhaustion, neither did parenting. You walk toward the mattress and lower yourself again, resting your palms flat against the hide. You imagine a child settling beside you, breathing softly, their small frame trembling lightly as the wind roars. You pull the hide up to your chin and feel the weight of it, solid and reassuring. For children, that weight must have been magic, a shield, a promise. The fire crackles again, sending sparks into the dimness. You smile faintly, imagining parents speaking in hushed tones, trying to keep their voices gentle enough not to disturb the little ones. In a world where danger was everywhere, sleep was one of the few moments when children could reclaim peace. You tilt your head back and stare at the ceiling beams. The storm howls, the cabin creaks, yet you feel a tranquility settle over you, echoing the kind settlers created for their families. Warmth through touch, safety through presence, calm through song. You exhale slowly, letting that feeling sink in. Nighttime on the frontier was not kind, but within these walls, parents shaped a small refuge for their children. A refuge made from stories, songs, closest embraces, and the soft rhythm of breathing together. The storm still prowls outside, but here, in the quiet center of the room, you finally understand how even the smallest frontier sleepers found rest. You rise slowly, stretching your back as the straw crackles beneath you, and your thoughts drift beyond the walls of the cabin. Not every settler had the fortune of reaching a shelter before a storm struck. Many learned the hard way that the frontier did not wait for comfort. The blizzard outside howls so fiercely that you can almost feel the presence of travelers in its grip, people stranded far from their intended destination. Tonight your mind follows them onto the trail, where sleep became a negotiation with cold and fear rather than a retreat. You step toward the door and rest a hand against the wood. You imagine pushing it open and stepping into the storm, only to find a wagon half buried in snow just yards away. Perhaps a lantern still flickers inside it. Perhaps exhausted oxen shiver nearby, their bodies stiff with frost. Travel in winter was always a gamble. One detail preserved in several wagon train journals explains that many groups preferred to halt travel at the first hint of heavy snowfall, knowing that mobility in deep snow could turn deadly in minutes. Yet not everyone had the luxury of stopping. Some pushed forward, driven by schedules, dwindling supplies, or desperation. You open your eyes and step back from the door as if returning from that imagined cold. You picture the interior of a wagon, canvas stretched tight overhead, snow piling against the wheels. The bedding inside would be simple at best, a feather tick, a quilt, and maybe a hide or two. Sleep came only after everyone huddled together, their warm breath fogging the canvas. You take a few steps across the cabin floor, feeling your boots sink softly with each stride, as you imagine how cramped and tense a wagon bed must have felt during a storm. You kneel on the floor, scoop a handful of air between your palms, and let it drift out slowly. The cold in the cabin is nothing compared to what travelers endured outdoors. Even a well-covered wagon leaked wind from all sides. Some pioneers wrote about snow drifting through tiny gaps and landing directly on their faces as they slept. A lesser-known but striking account from a Utah-bound wagon party describes travelers waking beneath a thin dusting of snow inside the wagon, their eyelashes frozen together. Whether this story was embellished or simply a stark reflection of life on the trail remains a point of discussion among historians who study overland migration. You stand and imagine how travelers tried to generate heat when a storm trapped them mid-journey. They pulled all available bedding into a single pile, stacked hides along the windward side of the wagon, and sometimes even brought their animals closer for shared warmth. You picture a weary traveler pulling a goat or dog into the wagon bed, not for company, but for survival. You wrap your arms around yourself, instinctively mimicking the tight positions people use to keep the cold from stealing their strength. You walk toward the hearth and let its warmth brush your fingers. You imagine a pot of stew simmering in the wagon before the storm hit, now long cold. Travelers caught in blizzards often relied on whatever food they could reach without stepping outdoors. Hardtack, jerky, maybe a leftover biscuit. Eating while trapped felt more like rationing than nourishment. Without fire, the body's warmth became its own resource to conserve. You turn toward the wall where your shadow wavers, and you picture the canvas of a wagon flapping violently in the wind. A loose tie or snapped rope could mean disaster. You imagine travelers waking repeatedly to check the fastenings, leaning out into the storm just long enough to reinforce them. A peculiar trail anecdote mentions using strips of frozen bacon as emergency ties because the meat stiffened like leather in the cold. Whether this happened frequently or was simply a desperate improvisation recorded once is unclear, though culinary historians occasionally reference it as an example of frontier resourcefulness. You move back toward the mattress and sit, imagining yourself within a wagon bed. The space is narrow, the canvas curves overhead, the storm presses against the fabric like a giant's palm. You lie down on your side and pull the hide over your chest. Even indoors, you feel the cold creeping up your back as the storm intensifies. Outside, travelers endured the full fury of the wind without the protection of thick wooden walls. Sleep for them was shallow, restless, and constantly interrupted. You close your eyes and listen to the sounds inside the cabin. Wind, crackling fire, faint groans of wood. These noises pale compared to the cacophony inside a storm-bound wagon. You imagine canvas snapping, oxen shifting nervously, the grind of snow against wheels, and the low murmur of travelers trying to comfort each other. Sleep often came only after exhaustion overpowered fear. You open your eyes again and stand slowly, pacing toward the cabin's far wall. You imagine the moment when a traveler decides to leave the wagon to check the animals or retrieve supplies. Stepping into blizzard darkness was an act of courage that occasionally turned tragic. Some accounts describe travelers losing their way only a few feet from their wagon, disoriented by swirling snow. This chilling possibility still fascinates survival researchers, who analyze how snow blindness and disorientation can warp distance and direction during severe storms. You walk to the window and imagine pressing your face against the frosty pane, searching for lantern light bobbing in the white distance. You picture a wagon train spread out across the prairie, each wagon buried in its own mound of snow, each family fighting the same battle. You imagine the faint glow of fire inside one wagon, a sign that someone was still awake, still warming hands, still whispering quiet encouragement into the night. You turn back into the room, imagining how travelers created makeshift sleeping arrangements to endure the storm. They used saddles as pillows, bundled clothing into pads, draped coats over their heads to warm their breath. They curled close enough that their shoulders pressed, their breaths mingled, and their body heat became communal. You wrap your arms around your ribs, feeling the phantom pressure of being squeezed into a wagon alongside others. You step toward the fire again and kneel. You imagine travelers yearning for such heat, praying that embers packed in a metal container might last long enough to warm their numb fingers. You let the blaze warm your face, thinking of those who drifted to sleep with frost forming on their blankets. You rise and walk to the door one last time, feeling the draft slide beneath it. You imagine pulling aside the canvas flap of a wagon, peering into the darkness, and knowing that sleep, even uncomfortable, shivering sleep, was the only way to endure until morning. You step back to the mattress and sit slowly, letting your body sink into the straw. Your mind lingers with those travelers caught on the open trail. For them, rest was a fragile act, a gamble against the cold. They slept not because the world was safe, but because they had no choice. Tonight, in this cabin, with the fire still breathing gently behind you, you finally understand the difference. Shelter transforms a storm into a challenge. being caught on the trail transforms it into a threat. And yet, even there, people found ways to sleep, to hope, to survive until dawn. You sit quietly for a moment, feeling the warmth from the fire settle into your skin before your thoughts drift toward the most desperate form of frontier shelter: snow caves, emergency burrows, the kind of last-moment refuges carved not from wood or canvas, but from the storm itself. You rise slowly and walk toward the coldest part of the cabin, imagining what it must feel like to have no walls at all, no roof overhead, nothing except the howling world outside, and your own instinct whispering that you must find shelter now, or not at all. You press your palm to the icy logs and picture yourself trapped miles from any homestead, your horse trembling beneath you, your coat stiffening with frost. Visibility so poor you can't even see your gloved hand unless it is inches from your face. Snow driving sideways, wind slashing like a whip, the horizon melting into a wall of suffocating white. Out here, waiting too long meant the cold would decide your fate. That harsh truth appears again and again in accounts left by trappers, scouts, and settlers caught far from camp. Many wrote openly about the terror of sudden whiteouts that erased the world and turned a simple journey into a life or death sprint for shelter. You close your eyes and imagine kneeling into deep snow, breath coming fast as you claw your way downward, digging not to escape, but to survive. Snow, for all its cruelty, could be shaped into protection. A frequently noted insight from winter survival stories on the plains is that packed snow holds warmth surprisingly well once it forms a stable cavity. It's counterintuitive, but life out here often relied on contradictions. The same snow that threatened to bury you could shield you from the wind if you understood how to work with it. You kneel on the cabin floor, feeling the cold seeping upward, and picture the first frantic motions of shaping a snow cave. You dig sideways, not straight down. You carve a shallow tunnel, then a rounded chamber, always small, always tight. Your breath turns the air inside a little warmer with each exhale. It's a miserable sort of comfort, one that settles unevenly through your bones. But in a blizzard, discomfort is irrelevant. Survival is everything. You rise slowly and move toward the center of the cabin, your footsteps soft on the straw scattered across the floor. Imagine yourself crawling into that small white chamber, the wind outside muffled instantly, the inside glowing faintly blue from the filtered light, the snow pressing close around you like an uninvited embrace. You curl your body into a ball, shielding your face with your arms. Settlers, trappers, and scouts often slept in these positions inside emergency snow shelters, using their own body heat to survive. An intriguing detail found in one mountain man's diary describes sleeping with boots and mittens tucked inside his coat, not for comfort, but because the warmth of his chest was the only way to prevent them from freezing solid overnight. Whether this practice was widespread or particular to a handful of seasoned wanderers is still discussed among those who study frontier wilderness habits. You wrap your arms around yourself now, mimicking that posture. You feel how quickly warmth gathers in the small space created by your limbs. In a snow shelter, this heat would remain trapped near your body rather than fleeing into the endless wind. You breathe out slowly, imagining your own breath creating a faint, warm mist that slowly softens the ceiling above. A real danger in poorly built snow caves was collapse. People had to create domed ceilings so that melting and refreezing distributed weight safely. Modern researchers still debate how much technical knowledge settlers truly had about the structure of snow shelters, and whether they used methods learned from indigenous communities or simply trial and error under pressure. You move toward the door again, listening to the distant roar of the storm. You imagine the opposite scenario now, reaching the edge of a forest just as the blizzard deepens. In dense woods, travelers sometimes scraped hollows at the base of large fir trees, using fallen branches as makeshift insulation. You picture stripping boughs with numb hands, stacking them into a crude nest, then covering yourself with additional branches to trap heat. Your own body becomes part of the shelter. You lower yourself to the floor and press your back against the logs, imagining the stiff trunk of a tree behind you. Each breath feels colder, each heartbeat louder. You stand and walk across the cabin again, trying to feel every step the way a wanderer felt the snow underfoot. You imagine hearing a horse whinny weakly before collapsing. You imagine your own hands trembling so much you drop tools. You imagine the decision to burrow into a drift because it was the only option left. These scenes appear in scattered accounts of frontier blizzards, written by people who survived and by editors transcribing stories heard from those who barely did. The accuracy of each version varies, but the pattern remains clear. Burrowing shelters were often the final act of hope. You pause by the hearth and watch the flames sway in the draught. You imagine being out there, wishing for fire, knowing it was impossible to light one in conditions like that. Snow shelters filled the gap between danger and safety, imperfect but effective. Some travelers carried small candles to burn inside their snow caves, not for light, but because the tiny flame could raise the temperature a few degrees. A curious field note from a Minneapolis collector of frontier stories mentions that a single candle in a snow cave could raise the internal temperature from below freezing to just above it. Whether the exact temperature shift was recorded accurately or simply estimated from memory is uncertain, but the principle aligns with modern survival knowledge. You walk back to the straw mattress and sit heavily, the hide falling into your lap. You imagine lying inside a snow cave now, wrapped in furs, your body curled tight. The cold digs into your bones, but the wind is gone. The world is quiet, almost too quiet. Snow shelters could silence everything except your own heartbeat. Some travelers later wrote that the silence felt unnerving, like being buried alive in a cold tomb. Others found it strangely peaceful, a temporary escape from the violence of the storm. You lean back against the wall and close your eyes, letting that imagined silence fill you. The storm outside the cabin becomes a distant hum. In your mind, you lie in a hollow of snow, breath warm against your sleeve, fur brushing your cheek. Your fingers tingle as if frost is just beginning to nip at them. You adjust your posture, curling tighter. Settlers who survived the night in these shelters often woke stiff, covered in frost, and half convinced they had not slept at all, but they had. Even the shallowest rest was enough to restore a little strength. You inhale slowly and open your eyes. The cabin feels warm after that imagined cold. You run your hand over the hide in your lap. You think of those who dug holes in drifts late at night, their arms shaking, their ears burning with cold, choosing the snow because nothing else remained. Their resourcefulness haunts the frontier's history. You stand again and walk once more around the cabin, letting the fire's warmth slowly return to your limbs. The storm still rages, but you now understand that even nature's harshest weapon could become a tool in the hands of desperate travelers. Snow walls protected them, snow chambers sheltered them. Snow saved lives more times than stories admit. You pause by the window one last time, watching white swirl against the glass. Somewhere out there in the dark, a traveler might be huddled inside a cold, glowing cave of snow, counting heartbeats and hoping for dawn. Tonight, you feel that hope too. You shift your position on the straw mattress, letting the hide slide a little higher along your shoulders, and a thought begins to settle over you like a shadow. Morning. The frontier morning after a blizzard was not comforting or gentle. It arrived with equal parts relief and dread. You imagine your eyes opening before full daylight, a faint blue glow filtering through the frost-covered window. The first breath you take is cold enough to sting your throat, and the first thing you feel is the stiffness of limbs that spent the night fighting the cold more than resting. You rise slowly and walk toward the window, pressing your palm to the ice-coated glass. The morning light is weak, and everything outside looks frozen in place. Snow drifts huddle against the walls. The wind has softened, leaving a dead stillness that feels almost eerie. On the frontier, waking after a storm meant taking stock of your own body first. One widely recognized note from early settler accounts describes how families inspected their fingers and toes at dawn, checking for numb patches or pale spots that hinted at frostbite. You lift your hand and stare at your fingertips, imagining how terrifying it must have been to discover skin that felt stiff or waxy. You let your palm fall gently to your side as you step back from the window. The cabin is quiet, too quiet. The fire is reduced to a faint glow buried beneath an ash crust. You kneel by the hearth and blow lightly, watching a few sparks rise. In this moment, you think of the countless mornings settlers awoke with dread, unsure whether their fire had survived the night. You add a small stick, then another, coaxing flame back into life. The faint warmth brushes your cheeks, carrying the familiar smell of smoke that frontier families associated with safety. You sit back on your heels, listening to the popping embers. You imagine someone across the room flexing their hands stiffly, trying to bring feeling back. A child whimpering softly because their toes hurt. A parent rubbing small feet with rough hands warmed near the fire. A lesser-known mention from a set of Colorado homestead letters describes families warming stones in the morning, and placing them under blankets to thaw chilled limbs. Whether this technique was widespread or reserved for particularly prepared households is still discussed among historical researchers who analyze daily survival practices. You stand again and stretch your arms overhead. Your joints feel tight, as though the cold has tried to settle inside them. You take a slow breath and look toward the door. On the frontier, the first person to open the door after a blizzard stepped into uncertainty. You stride to the threshold and kneel, touching the edge of the door where cold seeps in. Snow might have drifted high enough to block it entirely. Or worse, something might have happened to the livestock during the night, leaving grim discoveries waiting in the pale light. You rise and place your fingertips against the latch. You imagine the soft scrape of wood against ice as you try to push the door open. It sticks, not because it is locked, but because frozen snow packs the outside. You lean into it gently. Settlers often used their shoulders to break the first crust of ice in the morning. You give a small nudge, feeling the imagined resistance against your weight. The sensation is unsettling, as if nature itself has trapped you inside. You step back from the door and picture the process clearly. First, a cautious push, then a crack, then a gust of icy air hitting your face as the door finally breaks free. And then the moment of truth, stepping out onto frozen ground and looking immediately to your own hands and feet for signs of trouble. Frostbite did not always show itself instantly. Sometimes it lingered beneath the skin, quiet and cruel. You turn toward the mattress again, mindful of how settlers slept. Their toes were often the first victims of the cold, their ears, their noses. Some families wrapped cloth around their faces at night, but the cold still sneaked between layers. A curious detail from one northern homestead diary mentions parents tucking children's hands under their own armpits while sleeping to keep them warm. Whether this was common practice, or simply a clever technique passed down quietly, remains unclear, though survival experts today note that such warmth-sharing methods were remarkably effective. You sit on the mattress and remove the hide from your shoulders, folding it across your lap. You imagine the first minutes after waking in a storm-battered wagon or snow cave. Travelers often woke with limbs so stiff they struggled to stand. You run your hands over your arms, feeling phantom cold. In those moments, people would massage their limbs vigorously, not for comfort, but to ensure blood flow before attempting to walk. You push yourself upright again and cross the room, pausing at the wooden beam overhead. Sometimes frost formed inside cabins overnight, glittering on rafters and shimmering on blankets. You reach up and gently tap the beam. In your mind, tiny ice crystals fall into your hair and melt against your warmth. This morning ritual was a reminder that survival inside the cabin was not guaranteed just because a roof stood overhead. You kneel by the hearth once more and cup your hands near the rekindling flame. Your breath creates faint clouds in the air. You bring your fingers closer, feeling the warmth cling to the tips before fading again as you pull away. Many settlers wrote about the sensation of thawing ache, a deep pain as cold numbed limbs slowly regained feeling. It was a good sign, painful but promising. The absence of that ache, on the other hand, was terrifying. You stand, walk to the window, and wipe a small circle in the frost with your sleeve. Outside, the snow glitters under newly forming daylight. A quiet, empty landscape, beautiful but dangerous. You stare at the scene and feel the weight of what it meant to wake after such a night. Relief mixed with anxiety, strength mixed with soreness, gratitude mixed with fear of what the storm left behind. You pull away from the window and return to the center of the room. Your body feels warm again thanks to the fire, but the cold still lurks near the floor. You imagine stepping carefully around sleeping loved ones, checking their faces and hands, making sure everyone made it safely through the night. In many families, this check happened instinctively, before a single chore or word was exchanged. You move slowly back to the straw mattress and sit, letting your shoulders relax. The storm outside begins to calm further, and for the first time you sense the quiet power of morning on the frontier. People woke not just to a new day, but to the proof that they endured something fierce, something that could have ended differently. You trace a finger along the hide in your lap. Frostbite, numbness, aching joints, and breath that fogged the air with every exhale. Morning after a blizzard on the trail or in a cabin always carried the same task, checking that every part of you still belonged to you. You exhale deeply. In this cabin, with the fire growing stronger, you feel that strange blend of relief and caution wash over you. Dawn has arrived. but it arrives gently only for those who survived the night. You remain seated on the straw mattress for a moment longer, breathing in the warmth that slowly spreads through the cabin, but soon another thought rises in your mind. The settlers who survived these storms rarely did so alone. Knowledge flowed across cultures long before textbooks existed, and many frontier families discovered that the wisdom keeping them alive in winter came not from Europe or the East Coast, but from the indigenous nations whose ancestors had weathered these plains for countless generations. You stand and walk toward the door, resting a hand lightly against it. You imagine how different your chances of survival would be if you had arrived on this land without a single clue about local weather. Many settlers did exactly that. They came from places where winters behaved differently, or where warmth could be summoned with coal and brick. Out here, those expectations shattered quickly. One consistently recorded insight in early accounts of westward settlement is that indigenous groups such as the Lakota, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and many others possessed deep knowledge of the land's rhythms. Those who listened to them learned faster. Those who ignored them often paid a steep price. You step away from the door and move closer to the fire, watching its flame twist gently toward the ceiling. You imagine a settler family learning from their indigenous neighbors how to position a fire for maximum heat with minimal smoke, how to build low sleeping platforms that kept bodies off frozen ground, how to use certain grasses for bedding and specific types of bark for insulation. You kneel near the hearth and run your hand over the stones, as if tracing the memory of techniques borrowed long ago. You stand slowly and walk to the corner where hides are stacked. Touching the thick fur again, you remember how many settlers learned the importance of layering different materials in winter. A number of frontier observations mention that indigenous communities often combined furs with woven mats or layered robes strategically to trap body heat. Settlers who adopted these methods noticed immediate improvements in warmth. Whether settlers fully understood the reasoning behind such techniques or simply copied what they saw remains a point historians continue to examine through diaries and artifact studies. You lift one hide and drape it around your shoulders, then pull a small wool blanket from the bedding pile and layer it underneath. The combined weight feels snug, almost luxurious. You walk slowly across the cabin, letting the layers settle against your skin. This sandwiching method was something many newcomers discovered only after watching indigenous families prepare sleeping spaces in winter lodges or temporary camps. You picture a settler, cold and frustrated, being shown how to use hides not just as top coverings, but as underlayers, preventing heat from sinking into the icy ground. You arrive at the window and scrape away a small patch of frost. Outside, the storm still swirls, but less angrily now. You imagine an indigenous winter shelter near a tree line, shaped low to the ground to reduce wind exposure. The structures varied widely across nations, from earth lodges and tipis to snow-enclosed lean-tos, but each form carried centuries of understanding. A curious detail preserved in archaeological notes indicates that the insulating properties of animal hide, when stretched properly and treated with smoke, made tipis surprisingly warm even in brutal storms. Whether settlers fully replicated these designs or merely adapted elements of them is still a matter scholars sift through, comparing structural remains with written accounts. You turn and walk toward the cabin wall, placing your palm against the logs. Indigenous people often taught settlers the importance of wind direction. Position structures so their narrowest side faced prevailing winter winds. Leave intentional vents near the top for smoke to escape. Prioritize small living spaces in winter so heat could gather. You glance around the cramped interior and wonder whether whoever built this cabin learned some of these principles or whether they simply stumbled upon them through trial and error. You pace toward the center of the room, moving slowly as if listening for echoes of the past. Indigenous winter clothing also influenced settler survival. Thick moccasins lined with fur, layered leggings, high-quality hides treated to repel moisture. A lesser-known but fascinating insight preserved in fur trader journals describes settlers eagerly trading for indigenous-made winter gear after realizing that their own wool coats and boots weren't enough against the prairies. Cruelty. Even now you can almost feel the difference. Wool scratches but stays damp, while fur and hide trap warmth more efficiently. You lower yourself onto the mattress and rest your elbows on your knees. You imagine sitting with an indigenous elder near a winter fire, listening to advice about staying calm during storms, about respecting the land's cycles, about reading the sky for subtle warnings. Many settlers wrote about these teachings with gratitude later in life, Others never mentioned them at all, though their sudden improvements in survival methods suggest they applied techniques learned quietly. You recline slightly, pulling the hide up to your chin. You think about how indigenous groups sometimes slept with their faces covered loosely to warm each breath, a technique settlers adopted quickly. You try it now, letting the fur drape softly across your nose and mouth. The air warms noticeably, turning icy breaths into gentle clouds before they leave your lips. You turn your head toward the hearth, imagining the soft chorus of winter stories shared among indigenous families. Tales passed through generations, teaching children how to respect the cold rather than fear it, how to listen to the land's warnings, how to recognize the subtle shift in wind that signaled danger. Settlers often described these stories as both practical and poetic. A winter tale could hold a survival tip hidden in metaphor. Whether all settlers understood those metaphors fully remains an area of ongoing curiosity among anthropologists. You sit up again, pulling the hide off your face. The air feels cold but manageable. You walk to the far side of the cabin and press your ear against the wall. The storm hums outside, low and steady now. You imagine an indigenous scout stepping into a whiteout with confidence born from deep familiarity, a person who knew where to dig a shelter, where to find dry wood, how to position their body in the snow to conserve energy. Settlers learned these things slowly, sometimes through shared experience, sometimes through observation, sometimes through generous instruction. You step back from the wall and exhale slowly. The fire crackles again, sending a faint warmth across your back. You understand now that the survival methods settlers used in blizzards were not innovations of their own making. They were a mosaic, pieces borrowed, pieces adapted, pieces inherited from cultures with older, deeper relationships to winter. You walk toward the mattress and sit gently, letting the hide settle across your lap once more. The storm outside continues to soften, like a great beast losing interest. You close your eyes and imagine all the moments when indigenous knowledge nudged settlers toward survival, often quietly, often uncredited, but always powerful. Tonight, wrapped in borrowed warmth and sitting in borrowed methods, you feel that lineage deeply. You sit quietly in the dim cabin, the hide still resting across your lap, and the wind outside carrying a faint rattle through the shutters. After a moment, you inhale slowly, letting the air drift across your tongue. It tastes faintly of smoke and wool, tinged with the earthy cold that seeps in through the smallest cracks. You focus on that sensation, because the frontier was not only heard or seen, it was smelled, it was breathed. It was lived through every sense, and nighttime blizzards sharpened those senses until even the air felt like a story. You rise from the mattress and walk toward the hearth. The fire is burning low now, its glow soft and reddish. You crouch and place your hands near it again. The heat radiates outward in gentle waves, mixing with the smell of charred wood. That scent alone carries history. One commonly noted element from frontier diaries is the persistent aroma of wood smoke that clung to every piece of clothing, every blanket, every hair strand. Settlers carried the scent with them endlessly, like a badge of the winter season. Even after washing, garments smelled like the hearth, because smoke permeated fibers deeply. You stand and turn your head slightly, noticing how the cabin air also holds the tang of damp wool. As you walk past the bedding pile, you run your fingers across a folded blanket. The smell is unmistakable, a mix of lanolin, dried sweat, and lingering winter moisture. A lesser-known detail found in a handful of homestead letters notes that some families scented their cabins unintentionally with the aroma of wet boots drying near the fire. Leather heated too fast released a sharp, almost bitter smell that filled the entire room. Whether everyone tolerated it or simply accepted it as part of frontier life is something domestic history researchers still discuss, since not all homes mention the odor in their surviving records. You take a few steps toward the door, passing by a small wooden shelf. On it, a tin mug, a wooden spoon, a small cloth pouch of herbs. When you lift the pouch, you smell dried sage, faint but comforting. Many frontier cooks added small herbs to their stew pots, not only for flavor but for scent. A warm pot of food made the entire cabin smell richer, warmer, more alive. You place the pouch back on the shelf gently and let your gaze drift around the room. You close your eyes and take in another breath. Beneath the smoke and wool lies a subtler note, the faint musk of animal hides. You walk to the bedding corner and lift a robe slightly, pressing your nose near the fur. The scent is earthy and dense, carrying the memory of the plains. Trappers and hunters often smoked hides to preserve them, giving them a distinctive fragrance that lingered for years. You drop the hide back onto the mattress, letting it spread out naturally. You walk toward the center of the room and slowly spin in place, as if trying to catalogue every scent that shapes the frontier night. You imagine the smell of a stew pot simmering earlier in the evening, perhaps beans or salted pork. You imagine the faint sweetness of cornmeal from the pan that cooked cornbread, and layered beneath everything is that unmistakable mixture of cold air slipping through seams and the warm breath of sleepers resting under heavy blankets. You lean near the window, lifting the frost with your sleeve. The air here smells sharper, cleaner. Winters on the plains carried their own fragrance, a cold metallic tang that seeped inside whenever a door opened. You inhale deeply, imagining stepping outside to gather firewood, the scent of frozen pine drifting faintly on the wind. For some settlers, winter scents held memories. For others, they carried warnings. You step away from the window and walk toward the roof beam overhead. You place your hand against it and imagine the smell of melting snow dripping from the rafters during early thaws. Moisture, wood, and smoke blended together into a scent that some homesteaders described as oddly comforting. A few surviving winter journals even mention people enjoying the aroma of smoke-warmed timber on long storm nights. Whether this appreciation was widespread or simply a personal sentiment recorded in private letters remains a topic of mild debate for those who study sensory history. You look down at the hearth again, noticing how the cabin's scent changes slightly whenever the fire shifts. Smoke curls lazily from a small fissure between the logs, then dissolves into the air. That smell, the soft, warm fragrance of burning pine pitch, wraps around you like a blanket. You crouch again and stir the embers lightly. More scent rises immediately, richer and fuller. You stand and walk slowly toward the door. As you cross the room, your foot brushes a discarded boot. You pick it up and hold it toward your face. The smell is unmistakable. Leather, sweat, dampness, a little smoke, a little earth. This was frontier perfume, unchosen yet deeply familiar. Settlers recognized each other by such scents. Homes, too, developed their own blends, depending on the wood burned, the hides used, and the foods cooked. You set the boot down gently and move again toward the bedding. You lower yourself to the straw mattress, running your hands across its surface. The mattress gives off a faint scent of old grass and dust, reminding you of barns and autumn fields. That scent accompanied every movement settlers made in bed. It rustled up each time someone shifted under blankets. It mingled with smoke, wool, and body heat to create a nighttime fragrance unique to frontier life. You pull the hide back over your legs and inhale. The cabin's entire scent profile comes together now. Smoke, straw, wool, aging wood, cooling stew pots, leather boots, snowy drafts, a blend that was both chaotic and comforting. A blend that meant survival. You lean your head back and close your eyes, letting the smells anchor you. You imagine a child breathing in that mix and recognizing home. You imagine a traveler stepping inside for the first time, feeling overwhelmed by the intensity of it. You imagine morning arriving with new scents, freshly thawed frost, warmed blankets, the smoke of a restarted fire. You open your eyes slowly. Smell, you realize, was one of the quiet allies of the frontier. It signaled warmth. It signaled danger. It signaled life inside a storm. Tonight, this cabin breathes around you like a living thing, filling the air with the fragrance of survival. You sit with the hide still draped across your legs, letting your gaze wander around the dim cabin. The fire has found a gentle rhythm again, pulsing warm light into the room. Outside, the blizzard seems quieter now, but not calm. It is the kind of hush that follows hours of fury, a pause that feels heavy rather than peaceful. You shift slightly on the mattress and feel the emptiness around you. Not physical emptiness, but emotional. The frontier was full of it, especially during storms that locked families away from the world for days at a time. You rise slowly and walk toward the door. Your fingertips brush the cold wooden surface. The storm outside has sealed the cabin into its own little island, suspended in white silence. You imagine a family standing in this spot, realizing they might not see another human face for weeks. That realization weighed heavily on settlers. One well-documented observation from prairie correspondents notes that winter storms often deepened the already harsh isolation of frontier living, turning loneliness into something that seeped into dreams. People spoke less, moved slower, waited longer. You step away from the door and return to the fire. You crouch beside it, warming your palms. The cabin grows darker behind you, shadows stretching into corners where the cold gathers. You imagine being trapped here after several nights. The same voices, the same routines, the same sounds. You look into the flames and understand why so many settlers wrote about the strange quiet of storm-bound evenings. With nothing but wind outside and a handful of familiar faces inside, silence felt like a living thing. You walk toward the window, rubbing frost from the glass with your sleeve. The faint whiteness outside makes the interior feel even smaller. This sense of confinement could unsettle even the strongest spirits. A curious detail from a small collection of family journals describes adults pacing the floor repeatedly during long storms, not because chores demanded it, but because stillness made them uneasy. Whether this habit formed out of restlessness or fear remains an open question among social historians who study frontier anxiety. You lean closer to the window, feeling the cold radiate through it. You imagine a mother looking through this same frost, wondering whether her nearest neighbors had survived the storm, wondering if they also lay awake, listening to the wind scrape across their walls, wondering if the loneliness inside their cabin mirrored her own. In winter, distance stretched longer, loneliness grew thicker, conversations became fewer but more meaningful. You turn away from the window and walk to the wooden chair, lowering yourself onto it with a soft exhale. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine lying on the mattress while the storm raged earlier. You remember the sounds, the vibrations, the draft moving across the floor. Now, with the wind quieter, the silence feels even louder. You sense how settlers might have filled these hours with quiet storytelling, or simple humming, or prayers whispered without expectation of reply. The storm gave them no choice but to turn inward. You rise again, pacing softly. Your footsteps echo faintly. You realize how easily isolation could reshape sleep. Nights stretched longer. Dreams became stranger. Many settlers recorded vivid winter nightmares. A lesser-known reference from a Dakota Territory diary mentions recurring dreams about being lost in white fields, unable to find the cabin's door. Whether this dream reflected cold seeping into the sleeper's body or the deeper psychological fear of losing one's way in life is a matter still pondered by cultural researchers. You drift toward the hearth once more, sitting on the floor and pulling the hide tightly over your shoulders. You stare into the flame. In this moment, the fire becomes more than warmth. It becomes company. You imagine settlers watching flames dance, not because they needed to, but because it gave them something to look at, something alive in a room where everything felt too still. The crackling of wood was a form of companionship when human voices grew tired. You stretch your legs and lean back slightly, letting the hide cushion you from the cold floor. You imagine how long nights must have felt when storms lasted for days. The same cabin walls, the same repetitive tasks, the same fear that supplies might run low if the storm didn't break soon. You hear the faint hum of the wind outside, and that sound becomes a reminder of distance, of separation, of being small inside a vast and uncaring landscape. You stand and walk toward the loft ladder. You grip a rung and look upward. Loft sleepers especially felt the strangeness of winter isolation. The world below seemed distant, the world outside unreachable. Childhood memories described winter nights as floating, suspended between cold air below and warmer air above. You climb a few steps, imagining yourself lying up there, listening to faint breathing below, while the storm whispered overhead. You descend and return to the middle of the cabin. You place your palm over your chest and feel your heartbeat, steady but slow. This rhythm would have been one of the few constants in a storm-bound home. You take a deep breath, feel the quiet settle inside your lungs, and understand how people sometimes mistook the stillness for peace, and sometimes for despair. You walk back to the mattress and sink into it, the straw crackling under your weight. You rest your head against the hide and close your eyes again. The quiet feels heavy. The fire crackles faintly, but otherwise the room holds its breath. This is what settlers endured. Long hours with little change, little movement, little contact beyond the handful of people sharing the same space. It shaped them. It changed them. It forced them to find comfort within themselves. You open your eyes slowly and sit upright. Loneliness was not always an enemy on the frontier, but it was always a companion. Some settlers learned to embrace it, others struggled quietly. And some found that storms magnified every emotion, good and bad, until sleep arrived as an escape. Tonight, as the storm whispers instead of roars, you feel the weight of that quiet settling over you. reminding you how deeply isolation shaped life on the frontier. In moments like this, stillness wasn't peace. It was simply the world catching its breath. You shift your weight on the mattress and let your gaze drift toward the hearth again. But this time your attention goes to the objects scattered around it. A few stones, darkened by years of heat. A metal pan with a long handle. A brick resting near the edge, as though someone placed it there deliberately. You rise and move closer, feeling the uneven floor beneath your feet. The fire casts a soft glow over these tools, reminding you that warmth in the Old West was not simply a matter of building a fire. It was a craft, a strategy, a nightly experiment. You crouch beside the brick and run your hand across its surface. It is still warm, not enough to burn, but enough to comfort your palm. Many settlers relied on tools like this to stretch heat into the cold hours. One regularly mentioned technique in frontier household notes involved heating bricks or stones directly in the fireplace, then wrapping them in cloth and placing them at the foot of the bed. These makeshift bed warmers radiated heat long after the fire dimmed, keeping toes from going numb. You imagine placing this brick under your blankets, feeling the warmth soak into your legs. You lift the brick gently and place it on the straw mattress. Then you return to the hearth and pick up one of the smooth river stones. Its rounded edges hold warmth efficiently, a trait that indigenous groups had long understood. You close your eyes and imagine a settler father arranging stones around the fire, checking each one by touch before preparing them for the night. A lesser-known item in a small collection of frontier folklore claims that some families believed placing 3 stones at the foot of the bed brought better dreams. Whether this belief carried meaning or simply grew from habit remains something cultural historians explore as they interpret winter traditions. You set the stone down and pick up the shallow metal pan beside it. This pan, dark with soot, would have carried embers to different parts of the cabin, not for starting fires, but for warming specific spots where cold gathered. You picture someone using it to chase drafts by holding the pan under a blanket hung on a wall. The heat travels through the fibers, reducing the bite of incoming air. You hold the pan in your hands, feeling the faint warmth left over. You imagine filling it with a small handful of glowing embers, carefully covering it with a thin lid, and sliding it beneath blankets just a moment before lying down. You stand again, stepping away from the hearth. The cluster of warming tools on the floor paints a picture of how inventive settlers had to be. Warmth was precious, and once earned, it had to be stored, stretched, and shared. You walk toward the window and notice the cold seeping in around its edges. You picture someone holding a heated stone close to the window frame, not touching it but waving it nearby to detect where the draft flows strongest. Heat makes cold more noticeable. Settlers used this trick to find weak spots that needed patching. You move back toward the mattress and sit, picking up the warm brick again. You place it under the hide near your shins. The slow heat spreads upward, loosening the tension in your legs. You adjust your position, imagining how settlers arranged multiple heated objects around their bodies. One at the feet, one near the torso, sometimes even one near the hands. The warmth felt uneven but essential. For children, these tools were especially comforting. A small heated stone wrapped in cloth could transform a frigid bed into a safe place to sleep. You lean forward, resting your elbows on your knees, and think of another method used on the frontier. Some families saved the ashes from the fireplace, burying them in a covered container under the bed. Ash, especially if still faintly warm, acted as insulation, preventing cold air from pooling beneath sleeping spaces. A curious detail from winter cabin records notes that ash stored under beds also kept mice away because the scent confused them. Whether this claim was tested or simply passed down orally remains an open discussion among researchers who look for intersections between practicality and belief. You lie back on the mattress and close your eyes, letting the brick's warmth seep into you. You imagine lying here as a settler, positioning heated stones along your sides, layered beneath hides and blankets. The warmth would not last until morning, but it would give your body a chance to relax enough for sleep. You reach down and touch the hide near your ankle. The stone beneath it feels like a small sun hidden under the earth. You open your eyes again and stare at the ceiling beams. Shadows sway slightly, echoing the movement of the fire. You imagine a mother or father sitting awake, listening for the moment when the stones cooled. At that point, the cold would begin creeping back in, nudging someone to rise and add more wood to the fire. Heated stones and bricks were tools, but they required constant tending. You picture yourself waking from a half-dream, stretching stiff limbs, and dragging yourself toward the hearth to begin the ritual again. You sit upright and walk toward the hearth once more. The fire is steady, but you know it will not stay that way without help. You kneel and place another stone near the flames, imagining preparing it for later in the night. You shift logs slightly so the heat reaches the stone more directly. Settlers often arrange their hearth stones carefully, choosing flat ones for fast heating and thick ones for long retention. You feel your hands hover over the flames, your skin warming, your eyes adjusting to the bright glow. You stand and stretch, then walk toward the far wall. The cold here is sharper, more insistent. You imagine placing a warmed brick against this wall, watching the frost melt slightly around it. The warmth wouldn't last long, but it would ease the bite just enough for comfort. Some families hung blankets or hides directly over brick placements, creating a pocket of heat that hovered near the sleepers' heads. You trace your hand along the wall, envisioning where a settler might tuck such a brick. You return to the mattress and lower yourself gently, reaching for the hide and pulling it closer. The heated brick continues to radiate warmth beneath it. You stretch your legs and close your eyes, feeling the contrast between the warm spot and the cold air drifting along your arms. This uneven warmth was simply part of frontier sleep, accepted without complaint, because the alternative was unbearable. You open your eyes once again, letting your mind drift through centuries of people warming stones, heating bricks, tending embers, and shaping the fire for another night. These tools were simple, but they carried hope. Each warmed object said, in its own quiet way, you can sleep a little longer, you can rest. Tonight, with the brick's faint heat lingering near your feet and the cabin holding steady against the storm, you understand why these small tricks mattered so much. Warmth was not simply found on the frontier. It had to be made, kept alive, and held close. You lie still for a moment, letting the gentle warmth from the brick drift through your legs, and then your attention sharpens toward the sounds inside the cabin. The fire crackles softly, but around it, the darkness has a voice of its own. You ease yourself upright and listen more closely. On the frontier, the night was never silent, not even during storms. Darkness carried its own language, and settlers learned to interpret every whisper, creak, groan, and scrape. You stand and walk toward the nearest wall, placing your ear gently against the cold wood. It murmurs faintly beneath your touch, a long, shuddering sigh that vibrates through the logs. You draw your hand down the surface as though tracing the rhythm of its trembling. One often quoted observation from early homestead writings notes that log walls shifted as temperatures dropped, producing sounds like muted knocks or distant thumps. Settlers grew accustomed to these noises, though newcomers sometimes mistook them for intruders in the dead of night. You step back, eyes adjusting to the dimness, and wait. A sudden crack echoes above you. Your head snaps upward. The rafters hold steady, but you can almost feel their stress under the weight of snow. The sound is sharp, as if the wood has exhaled too quickly. You imagine a family waking abruptly to that crack, hearts racing, wondering if the roof was about to fail. A lesser circulated frontier account from a Nebraska cabin mentions rafters popping loudly enough to send children scrambling under blankets. Whether this was unusual or simply typical for certain wood types is still examined in studies of regional building materials. You walk to the center of the room, listening as the cabin settles again. The wind pushes against the walls, soft then strong, creating a low, wavering hum. Sometimes it sounds like distant singing, sometimes like an animal's cry swallowed by distance. You close your eyes briefly, absorbing the mixture of tones. Settlers often described wind as a living thing, something that moved with intention. They weren't being poetic out here. The wind changed quickly, and its different tones carried warnings about approaching gusts or shifting drifts. You move toward the window and scrape a bit of frost from the pane. The storm outside has softened, but the wind still lashes sideways. Snow hits the shutters with rapid taps that almost resemble footsteps. A hollow thump follows, maybe a branch bending under weight, maybe shifting ice, maybe something unidentifiable. You tilt your head, focusing. Night on the frontier produced countless ambiguous noises. Was that sound inside or outside, natural or dangerous? You back away slowly from the window, aware of how fragile the illusion of safety can feel when sound distorts in storms. Travelers sometimes reported hearing voices during blizzards, soft murmurs, indistinct words blown across the plains. Whether these were tricks of the wind or echoes refracted through snow is still a topic in environmental acoustic studies. You listen now and almost understand how easily such illusions could take shape. You step closer to the hearth, letting firelight brighten your gaze. The flames dance quietly, but as you shift your weight, the floor sighs beneath you, creaking with an old tiredness. Settlers heard this same creak whenever someone stood in the night, and the familiarity eventually blended into comfort. But to a newcomer, it could set nerves twitching. You press your palm against the floorboard and wait. A faint tremble travels through the wood, likely just the cabin settling under the weight of snow. Still, the sensation makes you momentarily alert. You walk to the far wall, the one facing the open plains. You lean close again, listening. A new sound emerges faintly, a soft scraping, irregular and hesitant. Perhaps snow sliding in sheets, perhaps the wind picking up a stray branch. You listen longer. The noise repeats, then fades. You feel your shoulders loosen slightly. Nothing dangerous, just the sound of the storm rearranging itself. You stand still in the center of the cabin, turning slowly in a full circle. Sounds rise and fall around you like breaths. The rafters twitch. The shutters click lightly against their hinges. A small gust squeezes through a crack and whistles a thin tune near the loft ladder. You walk toward it and place your hand against the rung. The wood is cold and firm. You imagine hearing this same soft whistle while trying to sleep, the sound weaving itself into dreams. You tilt your head upward again. A long groan ripples through the roof, deeper than before. You steady your breath. In many surviving letters from winter-bound families, people describe the roof as a restless creature during storms. Some even spoke to it aloud, asking it politely to hold on. Whether they meant it sincerely or said it to ease their nerves remains unclear. But listening to this groan now, you can understand the impulse. You walk back to the mattress and sit. The hide adjusts with a soft rustle beneath you. Even that small sound has a calming quality. You reach down and brush the straw lightly. The rustling crackle feels familiar, grounding. Settlers often found comfort in these small domestic noises because they contrasted with the unpredictable violence outside. You lie back slowly, feeling the sounds shift as your body changes position. The fire crackles in a soft, rhythmic way now, like a quiet heartbeat. The wind hums faintly. The logs murmur. You listen as if taking inventory of every sound that fills the night. Out here, recognizing these noises meant recognizing safety. Anything unusual demanded attention. You close your eyes again. The cabin sings its winter symphony. Creak, sigh, tap, hum, crackle. You imagine drifting to sleep while these noises float through the room. Some settlers described these nighttime sounds as companions, something that reminded them the cabin was still alive, still holding against the storm. Others found them unsettling, too unpredictable to sleep through easily. You open your eyes once more, letting the firelight flicker across your vision. You understand now why settlers listened so closely. Night sounds were not just background noise. They were signals, warnings, reassurances, reminders of nature's presence pressing against thin wooden walls. Tonight you hear the same soundtrack they did, and though the storm still moves outside, the cabin speaks softly enough to let your shoulders relax and your breath slow. You remain seated on the edge of the mattress, listening to the cabin's shifting sounds, when a quieter sensation creeps through you. Not cold, not fear, something more subtle and far more human. The slow tightening in your chest that comes from being trapped too long with your own thoughts. You pull the hide closer around your shoulders and inhale deeply. Frontier storms didn't just challenge bodies, they challenged minds. The psychological strain could be just as heavy as the snow piling on the roof. You stand and walk toward the center of the cabin. The fire casts a warm halo around you, but the shadows beyond it feel deeper tonight. You take a slow breath, feeling how solitude and uncertainty settle into your bones. One often referenced insight from frontier journals is that people had difficulty thinking clearly during long winter storms, especially at night. The combination of cold, hunger, and confinement created a kind of mental fog, a restlessness that curled around every thought. You pace slowly, letting your boots brush lightly across the floor. You imagine a settler pacing in this very spot, whispering half-formed worries. Will the fire last? Will the livestock survive? Will the storm stop before supplies run low? You pause near the hearth and kneel, feeling warmth on your hands but unease lingering in the room. A peculiar note from a Minnesota homestead memoir describes an entire family falling into quiet dread during a week-long storm, speaking only in short sentences because longer conversations felt too heavy to manage. Whether this emotional withdrawal was typical or simply one family's response is still examined in research on winter isolation. You move away from the hearth, and sit on a low stool. You rest your elbows on your knees and stare at the floorboards. The cold creeps upward through them, like a reminder that the ground itself refuses comfort. You imagine lying here for days, barely venturing outside, listening to the storm pound at the walls. In such conditions, fear became a companion, not always a loud one, sometimes quiet, patient, waiting for a moment of weakness. You lift your head and glance toward the window. Frost clings to the glass, thick and pale, distorting the world outside. You draw closer and wipe a small patch with your sleeve. A blur of white greets you, nothing else. You imagine a settler looking through this same pane, hoping to see the shape of a neighbor's cabin or the familiar curve of a hill. Instead, they saw nothing, just endless snow and wind, as if the world beyond their home had simply vanished. You step back and close your eyes. You breathe slowly, feeling your chest rise and fall. This rhythm becomes comforting. You think about how settlers turn to such small rituals to calm their minds, breathing slowly, stretching quietly, stroking the fur of a hide, touching the warm stones beside the fire. One lesser-known recollection from a Wyoming rancher describes how he spent storm nights carving tiny wooden shapes simply to keep his mind steady. Whether this practice was widespread or personal is unclear, but it reflects how people found ways to keep themselves grounded. You walk to the loft ladder and rest your hand on the rung. You imagine climbing up there, lying above the fire where warmth collected, staring at the roof beams while the storm hammered outside. The mind wandered in such moments, sometimes to memories, sometimes to worries, sometimes to dreams tinged with fear. Frontier accounts often describe winter dreams as vivid and unsettling. People dreamed of collapsing walls, of wandering into white fields, of voices calling from the storm. Whether these dreams were caused by the cold, the cramped sleeping conditions, or the psychological strain is still a subject of interest among historical sleep researchers. You descend the ladder slowly and return to the mattress. You sit again, letting the hide fall over your legs. You place your hands on your knees and stare into the fire. The flames seem smaller now, almost hesitant. You imagine a settler watching their fire shrink and feeling anxiety settle deeper. Fire wasn't just light, it was morale. When the flames burned bright, people felt stronger. When they dimmed, doubts grew. You lie back slightly, resting on your elbows. You let your eyes wander across the ceiling. The beams glow faintly with reflected firelight. You listen again to the storm, now a muted roar. You imagine hearing this for days, with no opportunity to speak with neighbors or gather fresh supplies. Many settlers described winter storms as battles, not just against the elements, but against hopelessness. You roll onto your side and pull the hide nearer to your chest. You think of the long nights when time lost meaning, when sleep arrived only in short, uneasy pockets, when you woke repeatedly to check the fire, or to massage cold fingers, or to listen for sounds that might signal danger. And between all those moments, the mind tried to make sense of everything, tried to stay calm, tried to believe that morning would come. You rise again and walk toward the door. You place your palm against the wood, feeling the faint vibration of wind. You imagine the sensation of being unable to open that door for days, that trapped feeling, that flutter of panic that took root in even the bravest hearts. A number of frontier letters describe people feeling cabin-bound, restless to the point of agitation. Whether this restlessness was seasonal or storm-specific is an ongoing discussion among scholars who explore frontier emotional life. You turn and walk back to the hearth. You kneel, adding a small log to the fire. Flame brightens instantly, snapping at the air. You stare into it, letting the warmth settle your thoughts. You imagine a settler doing the same, using the fire as a focal point to steady their mind. Firelight soothed the nerves, broke the monotony, and gave shape to the long hours. You return to the mattress and sit once more, pulling the hide around your shoulders. You breathe deeply. The storm rumbles outside, but inside, the cabin feels resilient enough. Psychological strain didn't break everyone. Some settlers became stronger through it. Some found comfort in routine, some in quiet, some in family warmth, and some simply endured, night after night, storm after storm. You close your eyes gently. The darkness behind your lids feels softer than the darkness inside the cabin. The sounds seem less threatening. Your breath steadies. For a moment, the strain eases, replaced by a quiet acceptance. Tonight, you feel the weight of frontier minds during winter storms, the fear, the isolation, the restless thinking, but you also feel the resilience, that kept them going. Even when the wind howled, they found a way to rest in the quiet spaces between worry and hope. You remain seated on the mattress for a moment, breathing slowly, letting the cabin regroup around you. The fire whispers, the storm grumbles, and then, faintly, another shape of memory drifts into your thoughts. A softer one, warmer than any brick or hide could ever be. You turn your head toward the corner of the room and imagine the quiet scratch of paws on wooden planks. Animals, not livestock this time, but companions. The creatures settlers invited indoors, not out of sentiment alone, but because warmth was warmth, no matter the source that carried it. You rise and walk across the cabin, feeling the cold follow at your heels like a ghost. You kneel beside the hearth, extending your palms toward the flames. In your imagination, a dog curls beside you, its fur warming your leg, its breath puffing gently into the air. One frequently mentioned observation in frontier journals is that families brought their dogs inside during severe storms, not simply to protect the animals, but because their body heat helped everyone sleep more comfortably. A curled-up hound could raise the temperature of a small sleeping space noticeably. You look around the room and picture it alive with small movements. The soft bleat of a goat brought inside for the night, the flutter of a chicken perched on a blanket. It wasn't elegant, but it was necessary. You walk toward the mattress and lower yourself onto the edge, imagining placing your feet beside a warm dog snoring peacefully. A curious mention from a Wisconsin cabin diary describes a family who let their oldest goat sleep indoors on the coldest nights because it made a fine foot warmer. Whether this was common practice or a quirky habit of one homestead is something rural life researchers still debate, fondly. You lie back onto the straw mattress again, letting the hide settle over you. You close your eyes and imagine the weight of a cat stepping onto your chest, gently kneading into the hide. Cats were valued not only for their warmth, but for their ability to keep mice away from stored grain. A sleeping cat was a quiet blessing in winter. Its purr softened long nights. Its warmth eased tense muscles. You inhale deeply and rise again, walking toward the door. You pause there, listening to the faint moan of wind outside. You imagine the settlers who hesitated to leave their animals outdoors in storms. Horses might be brought into lean-tos or closer to the cabin wall. Chickens sheltered under overturned barrels. Dogs padded freely around the home, shaking snow from their fur near the fire. You place your palm on the wood and picture a collar tapping gently as a dog wanders within the room. You step back toward the fire and crouch low. You imagine a goat lying directly beside the hearth, its body absorbing heat that it would later share with the family during sleep. You think of the awkwardness, the smell, the noise, yet also the undeniable comfort. One lesser-known account from the Missouri frontier describes families naming their animal hot stones, depending on how much heat each one radiated. Whether this affectionate habit was widespread or limited to a handful of humorous storytellers is unclear, but the image lingers vividly. You shift your weight and sit on the floor with your back against the wall. You imagine a circle of warmth created not only by fire and hides, but by living bodies, children, adults, animals all dozing in a shared cocoon of heat. You picture the gentle rhythm of breathing, the rustle of fur, the occasional snort or sigh. The cabin becomes less lonely, less harsh. Companionship softens the night. You stand again and move toward the window. Frost patterns still claim the glass, glowing faintly in the firelight. You imagine a dog pressing its nose to the pane, curious about the storm but unwilling to venture out. You smile faintly at the idea of the animal giving up quickly, retreating to its place near the hearth. Many settlers trusted their animals' instincts. If a dog refused to step outside, it meant the storm was far from over. You walk back to the mattress, moving slowly, hearing the straw shift under your boots. You sit and draw the hide close, imagining how settlers arranged their sleeping circles. Sometimes the dog slept between parents, sometimes at their feet, sometimes it curled near the loft ladder to catch rising heat. Cats claimed the warmest spots, often on the chest or near the fire. Small mammals like rabbits or even young goats might rest beside children to keep them warm. You lie down again, stretching your arms above your head. The ceiling beams creak softly, and you allow the imagined warmth of a dozing animal to fill the empty space beside you. You picture a dog nudging your side, settling its head on your shoulder. You picture flickers of firelight catching in its eyes as it drifts towards sleep. The companionship brought more than heat. It brought ease. It dulled fear. It turned the storm's roar into something distant. You close your eyes gently and let the idea settle deeper. Many settlers recorded that they slept more soundly with animals nearby during storms, not because it was comfortable, but because it was familiar. The world outside might rage, but inside, the breathing of another creature reassured them that life still moved through the dark. You sit up once more, noticing how the firelight shifts across the walls. You feel calmer now, grounded by the thought of that warmth and presence. Animals were not luxuries on the frontier. They were companions, helpers, protectors, and in winter, they were heaters of the most earnest kind. You stroke the hide across your lap, as if it were the back of a faithful dog curled beside you. The storm outside growls again, but you feel no fear. These imagined bodies, these low sounds of comfort, make the cabin feel fuller than it actually is. Tonight you understand why settlers welcomed paws, hooves, feathers, and fur into their sleeping spaces. Survival was a shared act. Heat belonged to everyone who could offer it. And in the coldest nights, the presence of an animal was more than warmth, it was reassurance that life endured. You rise slowly from the mattress, stretching your back as the hide slips from your shoulders. The cabin feels smaller now, its walls pulled tight around the fire's glow. You walk toward the door and pause there for a moment, imagining what it would feel like to step outside. The storm still hums, but it no longer screams. It has softened into something denser, heavier, almost contemplative. You press your fingers against the cold wood and then open your palm, as though feeling the weight of an entire landscape waiting behind the door. Your thoughts drift outward, beyond this single cabin, to the long, winding lines of wagon trains that cross the continent. Families on the move did not have the luxury of sturdy log walls or stocked hearths when winter ambushed them. Sleep came inside canvas-covered wagons, or under them, or between them, as wind clawed through narrow gaps. One commonly cited detail from overland diaries is how wagon trains arranged themselves in a circle at night, whenever possible, creating a makeshift barrier against predators and drifting snow. This circle wasn't perfect shelter, but it created a psychological boundary. Inside was safety, outside was danger. You step away from the door and let your mind build the scene. You picture the wagons forming their ring on a frozen stretch of prairie. The canvas tops sag slightly under the weight of early snow. Oxen stand huddled, steam rising from their bodies. The ground is uneven, pocked with footprints already disappearing beneath the storm. Maybe a few lanterns sway between the wagons, their faint glow pushing back just a sliver of the vast dark. You walk toward the fire and crouch down, warming your hands as though you were one of the travelers trying to coax a flame from damp kindling. The fire crackles steadily in this cabin, but outside in the open, starting a fire during a blizzard was nearly impossible. Many wagon groups slept without one. They relied instead on body heat, hides, and whatever canvas they could repurpose. A lesser-known recollection from a trail journal mentions that some families pulled their wagon wheels closer together to create a pocket of windbreak where they could huddle. Whether this practice was used widely or spread through just a few traveling groups is still discussed among historians analyzing migration patterns. You stand and take a few slow steps into the middle of the room. You imagine lying down under a wagon with snow drifting around the wheels. You pull your arms tight against your chest, feeling the sting of imagined wind on your cheeks. The cold presses in from all angles. The space beneath the wagon is cramped, forcing you to curl into a ball or lie shoulder to shoulder with family members. You picture a parent wrapping their coat around two children, anchoring the edges with stones or rope to keep the wind from sneaking through. You wander toward the window and lift the frost from a small corner, watching the storm swirl. On the trail, snow would sweep under wagon flaps, dusting bedding with icy crystals. Horses and oxen would stomp nervously, their hooves cracking frozen earth. The smell of cold mud, wet canvas, and animal breath filled the air. You inhale deeply now, imagining that mix. Such nights pressed the world into a small circle of movement and sound. You sit down on a wooden stool and rest your elbows on your knees. The firelight behind you flickers softly, and for a moment the cabin fades, giving way to the canvas canopy of a wagon. Above you, the fabric snaps violently in the wind. The thin wooden ribs beneath it creak. A child whimpers. Someone whispers reassurance. You pull your coat tighter around your shoulders, mimicking that quiet effort to keep warm. You stand again and walk toward the far wall. You place your hand against the logs, grounding yourself before letting your thoughts drift back into the blizzard. You imagine the wagon circle partially buried already, snow creeping between spokes and piling against the canvas walls. A thin path between wagons becomes the shared walkway, trodden by boots crunching through drifts as travelers check animals, secure flaps, and redistribute blankets. You kneel on the floor and close your eyes, picturing how sleep felt in such a place. A cold so sharp it made dreams fragile, a darkness so dense it swallowed torchlight, a silence broken only by the restless shifting of animals. Sometimes, a strange echo carried across the plains, the wind bending sound so it seemed like distant voices were calling. Some travelers described this eerie effect in journals, though whether it was real acoustics or the brain's response to fatigue is still examined by researchers who study the sensory experience of migration. You lie down on the straw mattress again, curling yourself the way a traveler might curl under a wagon. Your knees touch your chest, your chin rests on your coat. You feel the ghost of cold pressing at your back, the imagined thumping of canvas above, the tightness of a sleeping space shared with others. Every movement must be deliberate, quiet, and cooperative. You imagine shifting just enough to relieve pressure on your hips, trying not to wake anyone around you. You sit up again and draw the hide into your lap. Sleep in a wagon train winter camp was more fragile than anything you felt in this cabin. Settlers became light sleepers, attuned to every sound, a horse's distress cry, the snap of a loose rope, the subtle grind of wheels adjusting in the snow. You press your ear toward the nearest wall and listen, as though expecting to hear muffled travelers moving outside. You rise and walk toward the hearth once more. You crouch, letting the fire warm your hands and face. You imagine someone on the trail doing the same, but only after dawn, only after the storm weakens enough for a fire to hold. Through the night, they endured without it. You exhale slowly, letting the warmth settle across your skin. You turn away from the fire and glance around the cabin. The walls feel sturdier now, the ceiling higher, the floor warmer. After imagining the cramped and icy conditions of a wagon camp, this little cabin feels almost generous. Tonight, you understand more deeply the endurance required of those who traveled through winter storms. Their nights were spent in canvas shelters rattling with wind, bodies pressed together, sleep coming only in short breaths. They did not rest easily, but they rested enough. And now, back inside this quiet cabin, you feel the contrast settle gently into your bones. You stay near the hearth for a long moment, letting the warmth seep into your palms. Then a thought drifts in, gentle but insistent. The frontier was harsh. Yes, winter storms were merciless. But even in weather like this, a different kind of rule shaped the night. A rule unwritten, unspoken, but understood by everyone who lived far from towns. If someone came to your door during a blizzard, you opened it. No questions, no hesitation. Survival was a shared currency, and hospitality became a form of frontier law. You rise slowly from the hearth and walk toward the door. Your fingers graze the cold wood, and you imagine a knock sounding behind it, quiet, desperate, half buried beneath the howl of the wind. A weary traveler, a neighbor caught in the storm, a stranger whose face you might never see again once the sky cleared. One commonly noted element in winter frontier etiquette is that almost no one refused shelter to travelers during a blizzard. It wasn't a matter of kindness alone. It was expected. Lives depended on mutual aid. You lean closer to the door, imagining the faintest tap, then another. The storm swallows most of the sound, but necessity amplifies it in your mind. You step back and picture a settler rising from their straw mattress, their breath fogging in the cold, their feet hesitating for just a moment on the icy floor. They unlatch the bar carefully, praying the wind doesn't rip the door from their hands. And there, in the swirling white, stands someone shivering violently, their coat coated with frost, their eyes wide with exhaustion. You turn toward the fire again and step toward it, the imagined traveler entering behind you. You crouch by the hearth and extend your palms to the flames as though showing a guest where to warm themselves. You picture them removing their gloves with trembling fingers, steam rising from their skin as warmth slowly returns. A lesser-known mention from a Dakota Territory letter describes families offering the warmest spot near the hearth to any traveler who arrived during a winter storm, regardless of their own needs. Whether all families did this or only those with certain customs is still a topic of discussion among researchers who examine hospitality traditions across different immigrant groups. You stand again and walk toward the bedding corner. You imagine pulling one blanket aside, making space for the guest to lie down. Even if you barely had blankets for yourself, you shared them. That was the expectation. You kneel and smooth the straw mattress, as if preparing a place for someone who has just escaped the jaws of the storm. In cabins like this, bodies slept close not only for warmth, but because floor space was scarce. Guests fit wherever they could. Shoulder to shoulder with strangers. You rise and walk toward the small wooden shelf where a tin mug rests. You pick it up and bring it near the hearth, as though filling it with hot broth or water. Guests were offered warmth in whatever form was available. A steaming drink, a warm stone, a corner near the fire. You imagine handing the mug to the weary traveller, their fingers shaking so badly that a little spills onto the floor. You turn to the centre of the room and imagine how the atmosphere shifted once a stranger entered. The storm still battered the walls, but an extra body changed everything. Conversations began softly. Questions were rarely asked immediately. First came warmth, then rest. Only after that did people learn who their guest was, where they were headed, and what misfortune had pushed them into the storm. You walk toward the window and trace your finger through frost. A faint glow of fire reflects in the glass, and you imagine the traveller glancing at the window too, marvelling that they found shelter at all. Some frontier diaries recount the relief of seeing lantern light through a storm, a sign that safety was close. In a few cases, people describe this moment as life-changing. Whether this sentiment was literal or poetic remains uncertain, but its emotional truth is undeniable. You return to the mattress and sink onto it. You close your eyes and picture what it felt like to sleep beside strangers. Their breath, their shifting, their quiet murmurs in the dark. Trust was not optional. It was immediate. Many homesteaders wrote that hospitality strengthened community bonds, even between families who barely knew each other. A kind of unspoken alliance formed in winter. You open your eyes and let your head tilt slightly. You imagine the way stories flowed once the initial fear faded. Travelers shared tales of distant towns, new trails, dangers ahead, or rumors of good fortune. These late-night conversations often carried the rhythm of survival. Low voices, tired eyes, warm cups shared between hands. They gave settlers something rare during winter: connection. You stand and take a slow lap around the room, as though preparing for the next potential knock. You check the door again. You check the fire. You check the hides against the wall. These motions reflect the same readiness settlers kept whenever storms rolled in. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparedness. You sit once more, letting your shoulders relax. You imagine a second knock coming hours later. Perhaps another traveller. Perhaps a neighbour checking in. Hospitality had layers. It wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it was as simple as sharing a stew pot or adding another hide to the floor. You close your eyes for a heartbeat and breathe in the scent of smoke and wool. You realize that hospitality was one of the strongest threads holding frontier communities together. Without it, storms would have claimed far more lives. Tonight, you sit by the fire in this quiet cabin, feeling that silent rule settle around you. Should someone knock, you would open the door. It is what settlers did. It is what kept them human in a landscape that often forgot to be gentle. You rise from the mattress slowly, letting the hide fall away, and the first thing that greets you is the thin, pale light filtering through a frost-dimmed window. Morning does not so much arrive as seep into the cabin. You stretch your arms, feeling joints stiff from the cold, then run a hand across your face. The air is chilled enough that your breath still lingers briefly in front of you. A long storm night leaves its mark on every part of the body. You walk toward the hearth. The fire has slumped into a shallow bed of embers, barely glowing beneath the ash. You crouch and blow gently, coaxing the faintest orange pulse back to life. You add a small stick. It snaps quietly as it meets the embers. A few sparks jump upward, bringing a wave of soft warmth to your fingertips. One practical insight, often found in frontier housekeeping notes, mentions how families checked the fire immediately after waking, because even a thin line of red coals meant the difference between rekindling warmth quickly or spending precious time and fuel starting over from scratch. You push another stick into place and feel gratitude rise with the new flame. You stand, rubbing your stiff shoulders, and glance toward the window. The frost is thicker than last night, layered like tiny feathers. You wipe a small circle clear with your palm. The outside world glows blue and white. Snowbanks lean against the cabin walls like quiet giants. The wind has softened, but the cold still rules the land. You exhale and imagine how settlers felt at this moment, relieved to see a calm sky, yet bracing for the work the storm left behind. You move toward the door and kneel, touching its bottom edge. The wood is icy. You gently push, and it barely budges. You lean harder. A crust of snow cracks on the other side. Settlers often found themselves partially trapped after heavy storms, needing several minutes or even hours to dig free. A curious recollection in a Colorado homestead letter describes a family using a frying pan as a makeshift shovel when their real tools were buried under drifts. Whether this was common or simply a moment of improvisation is something rural life analysts still discuss when examining winter survival stories. You leave the door for now, choosing instead to warm your body before facing the cold. You sit near the hearth and lift your feet, placing your boots closer to the heat. Your toes ache, not from injury, but from the tension of a long night. Many settlers wrote about this morning ache, describing it as thawing pain, a wave of warmth rushing into cold, numbed skin. You feel a hint of it now as your boots absorb the fire's warmth. You stand and walk toward the water barrel. A thin crust of ice stretches across its surface. You tap it with your knuckle. It cracks, revealing dark water beneath. You lower a tin cup into it, bringing up a cold scoop. You sip slowly, feeling the icy water wake your throat. You imagine families breaking this same ice every morning during winter months. Some placed a blanket over the barrel to slow the freezing, but the cold still won most nights. You put the cup down and walk toward the window again. You wipe another patch clean and stare out. A gentle hush lies across the world, the calm after a long and merciless storm. The sky is clearer now, lighter at the edges. You picture a settler scanning the horizon for signs of movement, neighbors emerging from their own cabins, cattle stirring near the barn, maybe smoke rising from distant chimneys. One lesser-noted detail from a series of prairie letters mentions that families often relied on thin lines of morning smoke to know whether others had survived the night. Whether this habit was widespread or specific to more isolated homesteads is still considered an open question in regional community studies. You turn from the window and walk to the wash basin, dipping your hands into the chilly water. The cold shocks your palms, but the sensation also brings a kind of clarity. You splash your face lightly, drying it with a rough cloth. Settlers didn't have the luxury of warm water on winter mornings unless they heated it intentionally. Most simply endured the shock, accepting it as another part of the day. You take a slow lap around the room, stretching your limbs. Each movement feels sluggish at first, but your muscles begin to loosen. You picture settlers performing the same ritual, rising stiffly, flexing fingers, rolling shoulders, testing joints for lingering numbness. The body needed reassurance that it had made it through the night intact. One little-known observation from a frontier family's book of notes describes adults warming their hands under their arms as soon as they woke, a trick taught by an elderly uncle who had lived through more winters than anyone else in the household. You walk toward the mattress and smooth the straw gently. You imagine children stirring beneath blankets, rubbing their eyes, asking if the storm is finally gone. Parents checking their faces and fingers discreetly, making sure they haven't suffered cold spots overnight. You run your hand along the hide, feeling its deep warmth where your body rested. Settlers often aired hides and blankets by the fire each morning to keep moisture from accumulating, so you lift the hide and drape it carefully over a beam, imagining how warmth will dry it slowly. You walk again to the door, placing your palm flat against it. This time, you push harder. The crust gives way slightly, just enough to let cold air slip in. You shiver as the draft kisses your face. You imagine a settler pushing the door open gradually, then grabbing a shovel and clearing a path. Snow often stacked so high that families stepped straight into white walls upon opening their doors. The first steps outside were cautious, almost reverent. The land had changed shape overnight. You step back and return to the fire, feeding it another log. The flame brightens, illuminating the wooden walls in warm hues. You inhale the familiar scent of smoke, feeling comfort settle into your chest. Morning rituals like this kept settlers grounded, rekindling the fire, checking the walls, warming the blankets, breaking ice, stretching cold limbs. You sit again on the mattress and wrap your arms loosely around your legs. The storm has passed. Daylight expands across the frost. The cabin begins to feel less like a trap and more like a shelter again. You imagine stepping outside soon to inspect the world. The footprint deep drifts, the bent trees, the sound of melting icicles dripping from the roof. Settlers often describe this moment as the return of breath to the land. You rise once more and stand in the center of the room, letting the fire warm your back and the cold window cool your face. Morning has arrived, with all its duties and all its relief. And in this gentle contrast, the warmth behind you, the cold before you, you feel the quiet triumph that settlers must have known after every storm. They survived the night, and now the day belongs to them again. You stand for a moment in the center of the cabin, letting the warmth of the rekindled fire settle against your back. The storm outside has loosened its grip, and the silence that replaces it feels almost ceremonial. Your breath drifts softly in front of you as you turn toward the loft ladder. A strange calm fills the room, the kind of quiet that invites reflection. Out here, in the Old West, when storms swallowed the world and night pressed on too long, many settlers turned not just to blankets, fires, or clever tricks, but to something deeper, something invisible, something that lived in their hearts and minds when everything else felt fragile. You move toward the hearth and lower yourself beside the flames. The fire crackles softly, sending a warm glow across your hands. You close your eyes for a moment. Settlers might have done the same, bowed their heads, whispered small prayers of gratitude or fear or hope. One thoughtful detail often mentioned in family memoirs is that winter nights strengthened spiritual habits. When storms howled and cold crept into bones, people leaned heavily on beliefs that promised comfort. Whether rooted in religion, heritage, superstition, or personal ritual, these practices soothed the mind when nothing else could. You rise and walk slowly toward the window. Frost coats the glass in delicate layers, sparkling faintly. You place your palm against it, feeling the sharp cold seep through. You imagine a settler doing the same, whispering quietly to themselves, asking for protection or courage. Not out loud, not theatrically, just a small murmur into the night, a mixture of faith and fear. You wipe a narrow clearing in the frost and peer out. The world beyond feels distant, unreachable. You imagine how that distance encouraged inner conversations, reflections that settlers rarely spoke aloud. You turn and walk toward the far wall, where shadows breathe softly between the logs. You place your hand there and feel the vibration of winter humming outside. The cabin is holding strong, but settlers knew that storms tested more than roofs and walls. They tested spirits. A lesser-known passage from a Missouri homestead letter describes a family that placed a tiny carved charm near the hearth each winter, not because they believed in magic, but because the object reminded them of home, tradition, and safety. Whether many frontier families relied on such symbolic objects, or whether this was unique to certain households, is still examined by cultural historians who study winter rituals across immigrant communities. You kneel on the floor and rest your hands on your thighs. A soft warmth surrounds your legs as the fire burns brighter. You imagine the quiet rituals people performed before lying down during a blizzard. Some whispered memorized psalms, others repeated small phrases passed down from mothers or grandparents. Some held hands. Some touched the cabin walls, as if asking them to stay strong. Some simply closed their eyes and trusted that morning would come. These habits weren't always formal or religious. They were gestures of grounding, ways to calm the mind before surrendering to sleep. You rise again and walk slowly toward the straw mattress. You sit, drawing the hide across your lap, letting its weight comfort your legs. You imagine a family sitting just like this, forming a small circle in front of the fire, sharing calm words or quiet moments. Spiritual comfort didn't always come in the form of prayer. It could be the soft hum of a familiar lullaby, the gentle retelling of a story carried across generations, the memory of a warm summer day, the reassurance of a parent's steady voice. You lie back gently, feeling the straw crinkle beneath your shoulders. You stare at the ceiling beams, imagining how they looked to someone lying awake in the middle of the night, whispering into the dark to steady their nerves. A curious entry in one frontier diary describes a mother tapping a slow rhythm on the wooden bed frame to lull her children to sleep when the wind grew too loud. Whether this was a common method or simply one mother's creative solution remains uncertain, but it reflects the many small acts people performed to bring peace into such a harsh environment. You close your eyes briefly and imagine yourself drifting between wakefulness and sleep, hearing the storm outside but feeling anchored by a quiet mantra inside your head. Perhaps something simple like, "This too will pass," or "The fire will hold." Repetition was a powerful comfort, especially in a world where certainty was rare. You sit up again and walk toward the small wooden shelf where a Bible rests beside a tin mug and bundle of herbs. Not every settler was devout, but many carried a holy book across the plains. You run your hand over its cover, imagining the pages worn thin from use during lonely winter nights. The words inside offered structure, hope, reminders that others had survived hardships before. Yet even those who didn't read scripture found their own form of spiritual grounding, sometimes through stories, sometimes through music, sometimes through silent reflection. You place the Bible back and walk toward the loft ladder. You climb a few rungs and pause, imagining how the loft at night held murmurs of whispered blessings or quiet reassurances. Parents often spoke to children softly before bed, encouraging them to think of warm mornings, green fields, or loved ones far away. These whispered thoughts carried emotional warmth into sleep. You descend the ladder and approach the fire once more. You kneel and warm your hands, feeling the heat soak into your fingers. In the dimness, the flame reflects in your eyes. You imagine how settlers stared into these same flames, letting the glow settle their minds. Fire itself became a spiritual presence in winter, a small, steady thing that cut through fear and darkness. You return to the mattress and sit, pulling the hide around your shoulders. You close your eyes gently and breathe deeply. Storms tested people, but spiritual comfort, however they defined it, helped them sleep even when the world outside felt endless and hostile. Tonight, inside this quiet cabin, you feel that same softness settling through you, a warmth not from fire alone, but from inner steadiness, a reminder that rest comes more easily when the heart has something to hold on to. You sit quietly by the hearth for a long moment, the fire's glow warming your face, before another thought drifts gently into your awareness. While sleep on the frontier was hard won, what happened when someone was injured or sick during a blizzard was even harder. You turn your head slowly, imagining the cramped cabin filled not with silence, but with worry. A cough echoing through the straw-filled room, a feverish moan, a hand clutching a blanket too thin to hold real warmth. Winter injuries carried their own kind of terror. You rise from the mattress and walk to the window, scraping frost away with your sleeve. Outside, the storm still swirls lazily over the land. Snow drifts like slow ghosts across the ground. You rest your forehead against the glass, and the cold immediately bites your skin. One recorded observation from Frontier Doctor Notes explains how icy winds caused frostbite shockingly fast, often before people realized the danger. And frostbite wasn't the only risk. Sprains from slipping on snow, burns from tending a fire too closely, sudden illness from cold, damp air. Winter nights made injuries feel heavier, darker, more immediate. You turn away from the window and cross the cabin to where the bedding lies. You kneel, placing your palm against the straw mattress. You imagine a child lying here, cheeks flushed with fever, body trembling despite layers of blankets and hides. A parent sits beside them, dipping a cloth into a pot of lukewarm water, warmed earlier by the fire. You lift an imaginary cloth to your forehead, feeling the coolness sink in. Home remedies were all most settlers had during winter storms. A bundle of herbs, a pot of broth, cold water for fevers, warm stones wrapped in cloth for chills. You lower the cloth and exhale slowly. You rise and walk toward the fire, bending to warm your hands. The flames flicker, guiding your gaze toward the pot hanging above the coals. You picture a thin stew simmering inside. Families offered warm broth to the sick, not only as nourishment, but as comfort. A lesser-known detail from a set of Nebraska homestead letters mentions that settlers often leaned heavily on mint or willow bark when someone fell ill, boiling them in water to make bitter tonics. Whether these ingredients helped medically or simply soothed the spirit is still discussed among scholars who study frontier herbal practice. You stand and glide toward the door, placing your hand on its cold surface. The latch feels stiff. You imagine someone injured outside, perhaps an animal handler who slipped, perhaps a neighbor who collapsed while trying to reach the cabin through the storm. You push gently, feeling the imagined resistance of packed snow. When a knock came during such nights, settlers opened their doors immediately, but sometimes people were too hurt to knock at all. A quiet detail found in a Montana rancher's memoir describes a neighbor dragged into a cabin unconscious by a friend who found him face down in the snow. Whether stories like this were common or exceptional remains uncertain, but their tone suggests that winter demanded constant vigilance. You step back from the door, wrapping the hide around your shoulders again. You imagine someone lying on the floor where you now stand, shaking violently from cold, skin pale and waxy. The family would move fast. Warm the person slowly near the fire, not too close, to avoid shock. Remove frozen clothing carefully. Rub limbs gently to coax circulation back. You mimic the motion with your hands, slow and steady. Many settlers learned these techniques from indigenous neighbors or from trial and error. Their survival depended on improvisation. You walk toward the small wooden shelf and examine the items resting there: a tin cup, a scrap of cloth, a small bundle of dried herbs. You imagine someone reaching for these in panic. The herbs would go into boiling water for a fever or cough. The cloth would become a compress. The cup would carry warm liquid to parched lips. This makeshift care couldn't replace skilled medicine, but it kept hope alive, and hope mattered just as much as warmth. You sit on the floor near the hearth again, stretching your legs. You imagine someone with frostbitten toes placed exactly where your boots now rest, hovering near the fire but not touching it. Frontier knowledge emphasized gentle warming. Too much heat, too fast, made injuries worse. You lower your hands to your ankles, imagining the ache of numb flesh coming back to life. One oft-mentioned winter account describes settlers soaking frostbitten hands in snow first, then gradually warming them indoors. Whether this method was scientifically sound or simply folklore adapted over generations remains a topic of continued debate among winter survival researchers. You shift your weight onto one hand and glance toward the loft. You imagine a child resting up there, bundled beneath quilts, while a parent checks their breathing in the dimness. Winter illnesses often worsened at night when cold thickened in the air. Parents stayed awake to listen for labored breaths or sudden fever spikes. You climb a few rungs of the ladder, imagining yourself leaning over a sleeping child, brushing a warm hand against their cheek. You descend and return to the center of the cabin. Your thoughts drift toward the emotional strain. Storm nights felt longer when someone was sick or hurt. Every sound from the wind felt like a reminder of how isolated the cabin truly was. No doctor could reach them. No neighbor could travel safely. Families relied entirely on themselves until dawn. And dawn didn't guarantee safety, only a chance to decide what to do next. You walk to the mattress and lower yourself onto it, letting the hide settle around your shoulders once more. You close your eyes, imagining how settlers drifted into half-sleep while caring for the injured, waking every hour to check the fire, listening for pained murmurs, whispering soft encouragement into the dark. These nights blurred into one long vigil. You open your eyes and stare at the ceiling beams, faintly glowing in the firelight. In such moments, the cabin wasn't just a shelter. It became a place of endurance, where people tended wounds with trembling hands, fought fevers with whispered prayers, and clung to hope while storms tried to take it away. Tonight, with the fire warming your legs and the storm easing outside, you can almost feel the weight of those nights. The bravery, the exhaustion, the care passed between family members not because they had the tools, but because they had each other. Even in winter's darkest hours, compassion glowed brighter than the flames. You remain sitting on the straw mattress, the hide draped loosely across your thighs, when another truth rises quietly within the stillness. The frontier storm was never fought by one pair of hands alone. Every person inside a cabin worked to survive it, but some carried burdens that history often left unspoken. You rise slowly and walk toward the hearth, feeling the cool air cling to your back. In countless winter nights like this, women held the silent weight of keeping homes warm and families calm, performing tasks that rarely appeared in letters or records, yet shaped every hour of survival. You crouch near the fire and feed it a small log, watching sparks flutter upward. One repeatedly observed detail in domestic history is that frontier women often rose several times each night to tend the fire, long before anyone else stirred. They knew the fire's personality intimately when it was hungry, when it needed rearranging, when it threatened to fade. You imagine a woman kneeling exactly where you kneel now, hair loose from sleep, eyes heavy, working the embers with practiced care. No one thanked her at dawn, but everyone depended on her. You stand and walk toward the window, scraping frost from the glass with the edge of your sleeve. The outside world glows faintly, and you picture a woman checking for signs of worsening weather before crawling back under the blankets. Storm-born instincts guided her to look for subtle changes: the direction of drifting snow, the thickness of newly formed ice. Some of these insights came from her own experience. Others came from knowledge passed quietly through generations. You rest your palm against the window pane and feel the cold bite your skin. You step back and make your way toward the bedding corner. You kneel and run your fingers along the straw mattress, imagining a woman smoothing it each evening, shaking out the straw as best she could to keep it fluffier, warmer, more livable. A lesser-known note from a frontier housekeeping guide describes how women stuffed bits of dried grass and cattail fluff into thin bedding during winter storms to create even a small improvement in comfort. Whether this was a universal practice or more common in certain regions is still debated among researchers who study household survival methods. You lift one of the wool blankets, feeling its coarse texture. Women mended these blankets endlessly. Loose threads, torn edges, thinning patches, all were repaired by firelight while the wind screamed outside. You picture a woman sitting beside the hearth, needle in hand, stitching by memory when her vision blurred in the dim glow. Quiet work like this filled the storm-bound evenings, the soft sound of thread pulling through fabric forming a rhythm steadier than the storm. You stand and walk toward the hearth once more. There, you imagine a woman quietly preparing warm drinks in the middle of the night, heated water, weak tea, broth made from scraps, anything that coaxed warmth into sleeping bodies. You lift the kettle from its hook, feeling the faint warmth of its handle. You imagine her testing its temperature with the back of her hand, then moving gently around the cabin to make sure everyone stayed hydrated and warm enough to sleep. You walk to the door and rest your hand on the latch. Women often took responsibility for checking that the cabin was sealed properly before settling in. They stuffed fabric into gaps, pressed hides against drafty seams, braced shutters, and inspected the straw tucked between logs. A curious entry in a small winter journal describes a mother walking the entire perimeter of her cabin each night, pressing her palm along every joint, searching for new drafts the storm might have created. Historians still debate whether this was a common practice or an especially diligent individual, but either way, it reflects the deep vigilance that women carried. You turn and head toward the loft ladder. You climb a few steps and sit, imagining the loft filled with sleeping children. Women often slipped quietly up these steps, checking their children's breathing, rearranging blankets, warming their hands before tucking them under small chins. You picture her brushing frost from a child's hair, or gently rubbing cold fingers to bring back circulation. No one recorded these motions in bold ink, but the frontier was built on these moments. You descend the ladder and glide toward the fire again. You kneel, letting the warmth bloom across your face, and think about the emotional labor women carried. When storms rattled walls and children whimpered in fear, women soothed them with soft songs, gentle touches, and whispered reassurances. One quieter reference in a homestead diary explains how a grandmother recited stories from her homeland whenever storms grew too fierce, her soft voice steadying the minds of everyone around her. Whether other families experienced this same form of winter storytelling is an open question, but the rhythm of it rings true. You walk toward the center of the room, letting the fire's glow warm your back. Women also tended illness during storms, checking feverish foreheads, rubbing sore limbs, preparing herbal mixtures from dried leaves stored in small cloth pouches. You step toward a wooden shelf and lift a tiny bundle of herbs. It smells faintly of mint. You imagine a woman steeping it in boiling water during a long night, administering sips to a child or partner who could barely sit up. You return to the mattress and sit slowly, drawing the hide over your legs. The straw crackles beneath you. You imagine lying here after a long night of tending the fire, feeding children, patching drafts, and watching over the sick. Women rarely slept deeply during storms. Their ears remained tuned to every sound, the fire's sputter, the wind's shifts, a child's sigh. They rose before dawn, gathering strength from whatever brief rest they'd captured. You look around the cabin, sensing the quiet presence of that constant work. The fire is still burning because someone kept it alive. The bedding is warm because someone arranged it with care. The room feels safe because someone checked every crack, every latch, every seam. You close your eyes gently, pulling the hide closer. Winter nights demanded steady hands and steady hearts, and women carried both. Their labor was quiet, but it held the cabin together every time the storm tried to pull it apart. Tonight, you feel that invisible work like a warm thread woven through the room, binding the cold edges into something survivable. You sit very still on the straw mattress, the hide resting loosely across your lap, when a softer curiosity begins to tug at your thoughts. What happened inside people's minds during nights like these? What kind of dreams formed under roofs rattling with wind, inside cabins lit only by embers, on beds made of straw and hides? You shift slightly, letting the cold air brush your cheek, and realize that sleep on the frontier wasn't just a physical experience. It was a mental landscape shaped by weather, fear, exhaustion, and hope. You rise and walk toward the window, tracing a slow line through the frost on the glass. The view outside is blurred and pale, as though the horizon has forgotten its shape. You press your palm to the pane, the cold biting your skin. You imagine someone lying under blankets right here, falling asleep to this strange, blurred world. One frequently noted detail in frontier diaries is how harsh winter conditions altered dream patterns. Families often reported unusually vivid dreams during blizzards, dreams filled with color even though the outside world was drained of it. You step away from the window and cross the room, the floor creaking gently beneath your boots. You kneel near the fire, watching the flames move with slow grace. Firelight had a way of weaving itself into dreams. Settlers slept with flickering shadows dancing across their faces, and many wrote about dreaming of glowing figures, moving lights, or warm colors blooming in the dark. You lean closer, imagining those shapes drifting through a half-conscious mind, turning the storm's cold into surreal, flickering visions. You rise and walk to the loft ladder, resting your hand on the rung. Children, especially, experience powerful dreams during winter storms. You climb a few steps and pause, imagining a row of siblings bundled tightly together. The air up here is warmer, but the roof beams groan loudly. A curious note from a Nova Scotia immigrant's journal describes children dreaming of giant animals made of snow, creatures lumbering across the roof. Whether these dreams reflected fear or the imaginative minds of young sleepers is still pondered by scholars who explore childhood experiences in harsh climates. You climb back down and walk toward the door. You place your palm against the wood, feeling its chill. Isolation shaped dreams too. When settlers lacked stimulation, no visitors, no travel, no sunlight, their minds filled the silence with vivid internal imagery. People dreamed of family members far away, of summer fields glowing with sun, of bustling towns they once knew. Dreams became a bridge between the confined cabin and the wider world beyond the storm. You sit again on the mattress, feeling the straw rustle beneath you. You lean back slightly and close your eyes. The wind hums outside. The fire cracks. You imagine drifting into a frontier sleep, letting your mind swirl between wakefulness and dreaming. Many settlers described this half-state as a kind of winter drifting, where the brain wandered more freely because external cues were limited. One lesser-known entry from a Wyoming ranch hand's notes recounts nights when he felt caught between two winters, one real and one imagined inside his dreams. Historians still discuss whether his phrasing reflected a psychological response to prolonged cold or a poetic turn of mind. You open your eyes and turn your head toward the hearth. Dreams during blizzards weren't always comforting. Some were shaped by fear. People dreamed of roofs collapsing, of being buried in snow, of losing the fire. These recurring nightmares appeared across multiple accounts, though whether they were prompted by actual danger or by the primal fear of cold is a matter still explored in studies of frontier stress. You rise and walk toward the fire again, rubbing your palms together. The warmth helps, but the cold pockets drifting around the cabin remind you how vulnerable sleep must have felt. Dreams about warmth were common lying in a sunlit meadow, sitting beside a summer river, harvesting crops in late autumn. These dreams were gentle but bittersweet. You imagine a settler waking from such a dream only to find frost clinging to the window. You stand and stretch your arms overhead, inhaling deeply. You then move toward the small wooden shelf where a bundle of herbs rests. Certain scents, sage, mint, lavender, sometimes influence dreams, even unintentionally. When families used herbs in bedding or warmed them near the fire, the fragrance lingered all night. A few journals mention dreams that smelled like summer gardens, a pleasant contrast to the freezing world outside. Whether scent truly shaped dreams or merely lingered in memory is still uncertain, but the connection appears in enough accounts to spark interest among sensory historians. You return to the mattress and lower yourself once more. You lie back, pulling the hide to your chin. You let your eyes drift closed briefly. The straw beneath you shifts, the fire murmurs, and the storm breathes against the walls. In this moment, the boundary between waking and sleeping feels thin. You imagine drifting through dreamscapes made of swirling snow, glowing embers, warm rooms, distant voices. Sleep was not deep or steady on the frontier, but it carried its own strange richness. You open your eyes again, gazing at the rafters overhead. You imagine the dreams of a mother who stayed awake to tend the fire, short bursts of sleep filled with flickers of orange and red. You imagine the dreams of a child who listened to wind whispers, turning them into imaginary songs. You imagine the dreams of a traveller, body frozen and heart weary, dreaming of hearths and steaming bowls of stew. You sit up slowly and let your feet touch the cool floor. Dreams in the Old West were shaped by survival, by longing, by weather. They were reflections of a world that could not be controlled. Sleep was precious, but it was also porous, allowing worry and hope to slip inside. Tonight, as the storm murmurs gently outside, you feel that same dreamlike pull, a soft drifting of mind, a quiet blooming of images shaped by cold and firelight. You are beginning to understand how winter nights shaped the imagination of everyone who tried to rest beneath a roof like this. You sit for a long moment on the edge of the straw mattress, letting the hide slip just slightly from your shoulders as you breathe in the faint scent of smoke. The storm outside no longer growls with the same ferocity. Instead, it exhales in long, tired gusts, as if the night itself is finally weakening. You rise slowly and walk toward the window. Frost feathers still cling thickly to the glass, but the light filtering through them carries a new tone, a pale gold hinting that the worst of the blizzard may finally be loosening its grip. You rub a small circle clear with your sleeve. The view beyond the cabin is nearly blinding. Fresh snow glitters under the soft morning sun, every surface shining like powdered glass. The world is hushed in a way that feels sacred. You inhale deeply and feel the cold air shimmer against your lungs. One often mentioned detail in frontier recollections is that the first clear morning after a long blizzard brought a deep emotional release, a sensation of returning breath to both land and heart. Settlers wrote about stepping outside to a world-transformed danger still present, but beauty undeniable. You turn from the window and walk toward the hearth. Its flames glow brighter now that you fed it earlier, throwing warm hues across the interior walls. You crouch and hold your hands close to the heat. You imagine a settler doing the same, whispering gratitude into the firelight. The previous night's fears, the cramped sleep, the restless dreams, they begin to drift away as warmth spreads through your fingers. A rarely discussed observation from a collection of frontier memoirs describes how families often fell into a brief morning silence after winter storms, as though afraid to shatter the fragile peace the storm's retreat created. Whether this quiet ritual was widespread or unique to certain households remains a point of gentle curiosity among cultural historians who study emotional rhythms on the frontier. You stand and walk toward the door, hesitating before placing your hand on the latch. The wood is cold, but no longer icy enough to sting. You lean in, listening. The sounds outside have changed. The wind still moves, but less angrily. Snow no longer pelts the walls with frantic taps. Instead, it slides in soft sheets from the roof now and then, collapsing into muffled thuds. These sounds carry a strange comfort, signaling that the storm has spent itself. You press your shoulder slightly against the door. It resists at first, still held by the weight of snow. You push harder. A crack forms, letting a thin blade of fresh, cold air slice into the cabin. You suck in breath sharply. That air is clean, bracing, almost sweet. You imagine a settler stepping outside for the first time, blinking against the brightness, boots sinking deeply into untouched drifts. A lesser-known recollection from a Utah Wagon family describes children leaping into snowbanks after storms simply from sheer relief. Whether this was a common release of energy or a rare burst of joy is debated, but the image brings warmth to your mind. You leave the door slightly ajar and walk back toward the bedding. You smooth the straw lightly, thinking of how families often shook out bedding after storms to remove moisture and prevent mildew. You lift a hide and drape it over a beam to dry. You can almost hear the rustle of other morning chores, children stirring, pots clinking, someone stretching their aching legs beside the hearth. You sit on the mattress again, allowing yourself to imagine stepping outside now. Sunlight bouncing off snow so starkly bright that it forces your eyes to water. The sharp smell of cold pine drifting from the forest. The sound of icicles dripping as they begin to thaw under rays of sunlight. You picture footprints leading from the barn to the cabin, half filled during the storm, now ready to be remade by morning steps. You rise and walk to the window again. You clear another patch of frost and stare out at the transformed world. The land looks clean, renewed, innocent even, but the quiet beauty hides the work ahead. The roof might need clearing. The animals must be checked. Supplies have to be inspected. The cold is still deadly. And yet, the sun, faint as it is, brings something precious, a sense of possibility. You take a deep breath and step back. The cabin feels warmer now, not because the temperature has changed drastically, but because your mind has. Relief settles into your shoulders. Storms on the frontier demanded constant vigilance, but the moment they passed, people could reclaim a little of themselves. They could speak in normal tones again. They could smile at each other without the shadow of fear. They could let their tired minds drift back into rhythm. You return to the hearth and kneel, stirring the fire one more time. Sparks rise like tiny stars. You imagine settlers doing this exact motion on countless winter mornings, claiming back warmth after a night of doubt. You close your eyes and imagine stepping into the sunlight outside, letting the cold sting your cheeks before the warmth of the day takes over. You stand tall and look around the cabin. The storm's fury feels distant now. What remains is the soft glow of a new day, and the promise that life continues, despite everything the night tried to take. The blowing snow may have buried the land, but morning light unburies the spirit. Tonight's memories still cling to you, the fear, the cold, the shifting walls, the restless dreams, but they now belong to yesterday. Today carries a different story. The quiet joy of surviving the storm, the slow return of warmth, and the steady comfort of knowing that even the harshest nights yield eventually to gentle light. You stand quietly near the open door, letting the chill brush across your face before closing it again to keep the warmth inside. The storm has eased, and with its retreat, a new rhythm settles into the cabin. You turn slowly, taking in the familiar space, the fire, the loft ladder, the hanging hides, and beneath it all, you sense something different, something quieter than survival, something that belongs to the body itself. For even after the danger passes, sleep still matters. The cabin must remain warm enough for rest, and the people within it must find their way back into deep, restorative slumber. Not the tense drifting of storm nights, but real sleep, the kind that returns strength to tired limbs and clarity to fogged minds. You walk toward the mattress and lower yourself onto it, pressing your palms into the straw. It's slightly flattened from the long night. You rake your fingers through it, fluffing it gently, imagining a settler doing the same each morning. One consistent detail in household accounts is that bedding needed maintenance after every stormy night. Straw compacted, hides shifted, cold crept in. Families adjusted everything before resting again during the day, because recovery mattered just as much as endurance. You lie back slowly, pulling the hide over your chest. The fire's warmth drifts lightly across your face, warming your forehead first, then your cheekbones. You exhale and feel your breath soften. Daytime sleep on the frontier wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. Storm nights stole rest, forcing people to remain half awake, tending fires, soothing children, listening for danger. When morning brought calm, the body demanded repayment. You sit up again, glancing toward the fire. The flames are steady now, but still young. You kneel and place another log gently between the embers, watching it begin to smoke before catching flame. You remain there for a moment, letting the heat soak into your hands. A lesser-known mention from a Kansas farmstead diary describes people sleeping in shifts during the day after severe storms, rotating responsibilities so everyone could recover. Whether this system appeared in many households or just a few is something sleep historians continue to explore through journals and recorded memories. You rise and walk to the window. Sunlight filters through the frost, laying a soft shimmer across the room. You wipe another small circle clear and stare out at the quiet world. It's a view meant for contemplation, for unwinding, for easing the tension from the night. You imagine a settler standing here, letting the light relax their shoulders, knowing they have a small window of calm before chores demand attention. Maybe they take a deep breath, close their eyes, and allow themselves a rare moment of tranquility. You step back and stretch your arms overhead, rolling your shoulders. The muscles in your neck ache faintly, the result of a restless night. You rotate your head gently. Settlers perform these same small motions without thinking, coaxing stiffness from their bodies before lying down again. A curious entry from a homesteader's notebook explains that some families called this the second rest, a mid-morning sleep taken whenever storms left them too exhausted from keeping watch. Whether this phrase appeared widely or only in specific regions is an open question among researchers analyzing sleep patterns in rural communities. You move toward the fire again, lifting the kettle and shaking it lightly. A bit of warm water still swirls inside. You pour some into a tin cup and hold it between your palms. The steam brushes your face, relaxing the muscles around your eyes. Warm drinks weren't only for nighttime comfort. They helped people ease into daytime sleep, calming the body after hours of tension. You take a slow sip, imagining how settlers savored every bit of heat that touched their tongues. You wander toward the loft ladder and place your hand on a rung. You climb a few steps and pause, letting the warmer air envelop your shoulders. Up here, the world feels softer, more inviting. Many families used the loft for daytime naps during winter. The rising heat made it the warmest spot in the cabin. You imagine curling up in a nest of blankets, listening to the crackle of fire rising from below. Children especially fell asleep easily in lofts during post-storm mornings, their dreams gentler now that the wind no longer rattled the walls. You descend and return to the mattress, sweeping the straw aside and smoothing the hide. You sit, tuck your feet beneath the hide, and lean back, imagining yourself halfway between wakefulness and rest. Settlers sometimes dozed even while sitting upright, exhaustion dragging them under. But when true sleep arrived, slow, heavy, full, they welcomed it gladly. You lie down fully now, letting your head sink into the uneven pillow. You close your eyes and listen. The cabin speaks with softer sounds today. A small creak from the beams, the fire sighing gently, wind brushing the shutters like a tired hand. You inhale deeply, releasing the breath slowly. Your body loosens. Your spine settles. This is what good sleep on the frontier felt like when it finally came. A surrender, not to fear, but to relief. You open your eyes and roll onto your side. You imagine a family resting in similar positions, one person curled near the hearth, another leaning against a wall, children sprawled across blankets in the loft. Sleep was communal, shared warmth, shared vulnerability, shared recovery. You press your palm against the hide, feeling the warmth it holds. A rarely discussed detail in winter letters mentions that hides retained heat surprisingly well if used soon after being near the fire. Families knew exactly how long that warmth lasted, and how to nestle into it before it faded. You push yourself upright and walk toward the far corner of the cabin. You crouch there and press your back against the wall. Sunlight reaches this spot in long, faint bands. You imagine a settler sitting exactly like this, leaning against the wood until sleep pulled them gently forward. They might wake with a start, unsure how long they slept, but even a few minutes of deep winter rest could restore surprising strength. You rise again and face the door. Beyond it lies a frozen world waiting to be tended, animals to feed, snow to clear, tools to check. But for now, the cabin holds space for sleep. Rest after a storm is not indulgence, it is survival. You step back toward the fire, sit on the floor, and stretch your legs. You close your eyes one more time, letting your breath follow a slow, even rhythm. The storm is gone, the danger has passed, and now the body claims what the night took. Rest. Tonight, as you feel your thoughts soften and your heartbeat settle, you understand why daytime sleep after storms was as essential as nighttime vigilance. Sleep restored the frontier spirit, sleep warmed the soul, sleep prepared the body for whatever came next. And for now, in this quiet cabin filled with sunlight and lingering warmth, sleep feels possible again. You stand in the middle of the cabin, drawing in a slow breath as morning light spills gently across the floorboards. The storm has calmed, the fire burns steadily, and the world outside is cloaked in a new, bright stillness. You pull the hide more securely around your shoulders and take a slow walk toward the window. Frost still clings stubbornly to the glass, but the sunlight behind it glimmers like a quiet promise. You lift your sleeve and clear one more small circle. The world looks softer now, clean and pale, the kind of morning that makes even the cold feel thoughtful. You step back from the window and turn toward the door. Your boots crunch faintly on the packed straw. The latch feels lighter than it did hours ago. You press an open palm against the door's surface, sensing the faint vibrations of a world waking up. Out there, under mounds of fresh snow, trails have disappeared, tracks have vanished, landmarks have changed shape entirely, and yet, settlers knew they could not remain inside forever. People out here learned to navigate by instinct when storms erased everything they recognized. You walk toward the hearth and crouch beside the flames. Their warmth wraps around your fingers, making your skin prickle as cold retreats. You imagine a settler performing this same quiet ritual before heading outside. One well-documented insight in early trapper accounts is that pioneers often memorized the terrain around their homes long before winter, set in learning the paths by heart, so that even when snow made them invisible, the feet remembered what the eyes could no longer see. You stand and take a slow step toward the wall, where several tools rest. A shovel, a wooden pole, a length of rope. You imagine tying that rope around your waist before stepping outside, anchoring yourself to the cabin in case the wind picked up unexpectedly. Some families kept these lengths of rope ready by the door every winter. A lesser-known recollection from a frontier trading post notes that people used these ropes not only during storms, but also during the calm days after a blizzard, when drifts hid sudden drop-offs or frozen creeks. Whether this knowledge spread widely or stayed within certain communities remains a subject of gentle interest among scholars who analyze winter navigation across the plains. You gather the imaginary tools, tilt your head slightly, and listen to the muffled sounds outside. Snow sliding from the roof, a distant crack, maybe a tree branch shedding ice. You walk toward the door again and push it open a few inches. A rush of cold air meets you, sharp and invigorating. You open the door wider. For the first time in many hours, light fully enters the cabin. You step just beyond the threshold and look out. Snowbanks rise like white cliffs on either side. The world glows. Every bit of light bouncing off the surface sends tiny sparks into the air. The cold brushes your cheeks but no longer stings. You inhale deeply, letting the cold widen your lungs. You imagine a settler doing the same, a first breath of relief after fear, fatigue, and endless listening. You step inside again and close the door. The cabin welcomes you with its familiar warmth. You walk toward the mattress, where your footprints left gentle impressions. The straw rustles softly as you lower yourself onto it. You let the hide cover your legs again. Outside waits a world that must be rebuilt, shoveled, checked, fed, measured, and mapped once more. But inside, for one last moment, you sit and absorb the cabin's safety. You tilt your head and look at the beams overhead. Every storm reshaped the frontier. Every night taught something new about fire, cold, fear, resourcefulness, community, and the body itself. You trace a finger along the hide and feel the soft texture beneath your touch. You imagine how settlers moved through these cycles, season after season. Their sleep depended on vigilance, warmth, faith, routines, animals, tools, and hope. Their rest was never simple, but it was always earned. You lie back slowly, letting your body sink into the straw. The fire crackles beside you, sending small waves of heat to your skin. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine what it felt like to drift towards sleep after surviving nights like these. Exhaustion mixed with triumph, weariness softened by the calm that followed chaos, the knowledge that the storm had passed, and that morning brought another chance. You open your eyes again and sit up. You take one more look around the cabin. This small room held everything: danger, fear, warmth, routine, survival. When people spoke about the Old West, they often spoke of wide open spaces, but the truth lived in places like this, cramped cabins with glowing hearths that held back the dark. You stand and smooth the hide across the mattress. You take a final breath of warm, smoky air. You let your hand brush the wooden wall one last time. This cabin, like thousands before it, carried people through storms that would have swallowed them whole without shelter. You step to the center of the room, letting the last threads of the storm fade from your mind. And now, in this quiet space with the world hushed outside and the fire glowing low, you let yourself settle. The long night has ended. You have reached the calm. The storm has drifted far from you now, softened into memory, leaving behind only the faint scent of smoke and the gentle hush of morning snow. As you stand in this quiet cabin, let the last traces of cold slip from your shoulders. Feel your breath grow slower, deeper, calmer. Everything around you has softened. The wind, the light, even your thoughts. Let the warmth from the fire drift toward your skin in long, slow waves. Imagine the glow settling into your muscles, easing the tightness that storms always leave behind. Let your hands relax, your jaw loosen, your shoulders fall into a comfortable weight. Nothing outside needs your attention anymore. The world can rest exactly where it is. Picture the snow-covered land stretching softly into the distance, smooth and untouched. A quiet blanket, a calm horizon. Nothing rushing, nothing demanding. Just the gentle stillness that follows a long, unforgiving night. As you breathe, imagine that you are lying back on the warm straw, the hide pulled up to your chest. Feel the steady heat of the hearth behind you. Feel the softness of the blankets around you. Feel the peaceful rhythm of the cabin settling into silence. This is your moment to unwind, your moment to release everything the storm stirred up. Each breath carries you deeper into calm, deeper into warmth, deeper into quiet. Let the last of the night fade from your mind like snow melting beneath early sunlight. Let your thoughts drift softer, slower, lighter. You are safe now. The storm has passed. Sleep well.